The skies above Aloria bled crimson as the sun began its descent behind the jagged peaks of the western mountains. Captain Rin Kale stood at the edge of the battlefield, her legendary sword, Lumina, hanging loosely at her side, its crystalline edge still gleaming despite the carnage it had carved through enemy ranks. The once verdant plains of Keldar now lay scorched and barren, littered with the bodies of fallen soldiers, from both the Light Alliance and the Charred Throne. 6 years of war had transformed this frontier into a wasteland. 6 years of senseless bloodshed, of tactical advances, and retreats, of victories that felt hollow, and defeats that cut deep. And for what? Territory, resources, power. The reasons seemed to blur with each passing day, with each life lost to the insatiable appetite of conflict. Rin wiped the sweat and grime from her brow, her emerald eyes scanning the horizon. The Light Alliance had managed to push back the forces of the Charred Throne once again, but at great cost. Half her squadron lay dead or wounded, brave men and women who had followed her into the fray without question. Their faces haunted her in the quiet moments between battles, faces that grew more numerous with each engagement. "Captain!" a voice called out behind her. Rin turned to see her lieutenant, a young man barely out of his training years, approaching with urgency in his stride. "Intelligence reports enemy movement near Harris Fortress. They suspect Major Valak Thorn himself is leading the operation." Valak Thorn. The name sent a chill down Rin's spine. The Charred Throne's most decorated officer, known for his ruthless efficiency and tactical brilliance. The Butcher of Neverdale, they called him, after he orchestrated the massacre that claimed over 2,000 Alliance lives in a single night. Among them had been Rin's childhood friend and mentor, Commander Seren Voss. "How many?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the storm brewing within. "A small contingent, Captain. No more than 30 soldiers. They appear to be conducting some kind of retrieval operation." Rin's brow furrowed. A retrieval operation led by someone of Thorn's rank that could only mean one thing. Something of immense value was hidden within the ruins of Harris Fortress. "Gather our remaining forces," she commanded. "We move in 1 hour." The lieutenant hesitated. "Captain, with respect, our troops are exhausted. We've been fighting for 3 days straight. And we'll fight for 3 more if necessary," Rin replied, her tone brooking no argument. "Whatever Thorn is after, we cannot allow him to claim it. This could be our chance to strike a decisive blow." As the lieutenant departed to relay her orders, Rin unsheathed Lumina once more. The ancestral blade of her family passed down through generations of Kale warriors, its edge never dulling its luster, never fading. Legend held that the sword had been forged in the heart of a dying star imbued with ancient magic, long forgotten in the annals of Aelorian history. But more than just a weapon of extraordinary craftsmanship, Lumina carried with it the weight of tradition, of the Blood Oath law, an archaic code that bound its wielder to sacred duties. Rin had studied these laws since childhood, committing them to memory, as all Kales had done before her. Yet, some aspects of the ancient text remained enigmatic, its full implications never tested in modern times. As twilight descended upon the battlefield, Rin led her squadron through the shadow of ruined buildings and fallen monuments. Harris Fortress, once a proud outpost of the Light Alliance, now stood as a skeletal reminder of the war's destructive reach. Its walls, partially collapsed, offered little protection, but ample hiding places for an ambush. The smell of smoke and death hung heavy in the air as they approached, moving silently through the rubble. Rin raised her fist, signaling her troops to halt as they reached the outer perimeter. Ahead, the soft glow of torches revealed movement within the fortress's central chamber. The enemy had already arrived. "Surround the main hall," she whispered to her lieutenant. "On my signal, we converge." With practiced precision, her soldiers dispersed, taking up positions around the crumbling structure. Rin moved forward alone, her footsteps silent against the stone floor. Through a shattered window, she caught her first glimpse of Valak Thorn. Tall and imposing, with raven black hair pulled back tightly from a face that seemed carved from marble, The major directed his soldiers with quiet authority as they excavated something from beneath the fortress floor. His uniform, the deep crimson of the Charred Throne's elite officers, stood in stark contrast to the ashen surroundings. Rin watched as his men unearthed a metal container, roughly the size of a small chest. Even from her position, she could see the strange symbols etched upon its surface, ancient Elorian script, similar to those found on her own sword. Whatever lay within that container, it was connected to the old magics of their world. She had seen enough. Raising her sword, Rin signaled the attack. The Light Alliance soldiers swarmed into the chamber from all sides, catching the Charred Throne forces in a moment of vulnerability. Chaos erupted as steel met steel, the clash of weapons echoing through the ruined fortress. Rin cut through the enemy ranks with deadly efficiency, Lumina singing through the air as it claimed life after life. Her target, however, remained clear, Valak Thorn, who had drawn his own weapon and now fought with a grace that belied his fearsome reputation. Their eyes met across the battlefield, a moment of recognition passing between two seasoned warriors. And then they were moving toward each other, drawn by the inexorable pull of destiny. "Captain Kale," Thorn acknowledged as they circled each other, the battle raging around them forgotten. "Your reputation precedes you." "As does yours, Butcher," Rin spat, her grip tightening on Lumina's hilt. A ghost of a smile played across Thorn's lips. "Is that what they call me? How dramatic." 2,000 at Neverdale," Rin replied, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Including Commander Voss. Was that dramatic enough for you?" Something flickered across Thorn's face. Regret, remorse. It vanished too quickly for Rin to be certain. "War demands sacrifices," he said simply. "As a soldier, you should understand that better than most. There's a difference between sacrifice and slaughter." With that, Rin lunged forward, Lumina arcing through the air with lethal intent. Thorn parried the blow with his own blade, the impact sending vibrations up both their arms. What followed was a dance of death, each combatant matching the other move, for move strength, for strength, will, for will. Rin had never faced an opponent so evenly matched to her skills. For every advance she made, Thorn had a counter. For every opening she created, he closed it before she could exploit it. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, as they fought, their soldiers gradually falling back to give them space, recognizing the duel for what it was, a contest between champions. A misstep on loose rubble nearly cost Rin her life, as Thorn's blade whistled past her throat, missing by mere centimeters. She recovered quickly, spinning low to sweep at his legs. He jumped to avoid the attack, but the movement placed him momentarily off balance. Seizing the opportunity, Rin surged upward, Lumina flashing in the torchlight. The blade connected, slicing a deep gash across Thorn's left cheek. Blood sprayed from the wound droplets, spattering across Lumina's crystalline surface. And then something extraordinary happened. The blood, instead of sliding off the immaculate blade, seemed to be absorbed into it. Lumina pulsed with a brilliant blue light, the ancient runes etched along its length, illuminating one by one. A shockwave of energy emanated from the sword, throwing both Rin and Thorn backward. As Rin struggled to her feet, a searing pain shot through her right arm, the arm that held Lumina. Glancing down, she watched in horror as the same runes that glowed on her sword now etched themselves into her skin, burning like brands. Across from her, Thorn touched the wound on his face, his expression one of bewilderment, as he observed the mystical phenomenon unfolding. "What have you done?" he demanded. But Rin had no answer. The pain subsided as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind intricate markings that spiraled up her arm from wrist to shoulder. And with their appearance came knowledge immediate, unbidden, and terrible in its implications. The Blood Oath Law had been invoked. In that moment of clarity, Rin understood what the ancient texts had only hinted at. When the blood of an enemy touched Lumina's blade, a sacred bond was formed, a blood debt that could only be repaid through service. The wielder of the sword became bound to protect the one whose blood had awakened the magic, until such time as the debt was considered paid. Rin Kale, captain of the Light Alliance, was now magically compelled to protect Major Valak Thorn, her sworn enemy, with her life if necessary. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sounds of battle. "This cannot be." But the burning marks on her arm and the resonating hum of Lumina confirmed the unthinkable truth. The blood oath had been sealed. Before she could process the full implications of what had occurred, a deafening explosion rocked the fortress. The metal container Thorn's men had unearthed had been breached in the fighting, releasing a pulse of crimson energy that rippled outward with destructive force. "Fall back!" Rin shouted to her troops, even as the ceiling began to collapse around them. "Retreat!" But even as she gave the order, her gaze remained fixed on Thorn, who had been knocked unconscious by falling debris. The compulsion of the blood oath tugged at her, an instinctual urge to protect him that conflicted with everything she believed. All around them, Alliance and Charred Throne soldiers alike were fleeing the crumbling fortress. In moments, Rin knew they would be buried beneath tons of stone. Cursing the ancient magic that now bound her, she sheathed Lumina and rushed to Thorn's side. With strength born of desperation, she hoisted his unconscious form over her shoulder and staggered toward the nearest exit, even as the world crashed down around them. They emerged into the night air seconds before the fortress imploded behind them, sending a plume of dust and debris skyward. Rin fell to her knees, gasping for breath, the weight of Thorn's body and the impossible situation pressing down upon her. In the distance, she could hear the voices of her soldiers calling her name, searching for their captain in the chaos of the collapse. And from the opposite direction, the shouts of Charred Throne officers rallying their remaining forces. Rin made her decision in an instant. She could not return to the Alliance camp with an enemy officer in tow, certainly not one as high-ranking and notorious as Valak Thorn. Nor could she simply leave him to his own forces, not when the blood oath compelled her to ensure his safety. There was only one path forward, though it filled her with dread. They would have to flee together away from both armies, until she could find a way to break the magical bond that now tied her fate to that of her greatest enemy. With renewed determination, Rin dragged Thorn into the shadows of a nearby ravine, vanishing into the night, as both armies converged on the ruins of Harris Fortress. Dawn broke over the charred wastes, a merciless sun climbing into a cloudless sky, promising heat that would test the limits of human endurance. Rin had traveled through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the armies that would surely be searching for them by now. Valak Thorn remained unconscious, the wound on his face having finally stopped bleeding, but now showing signs of infection. The angry red lines spreading from the gash concerned Rin more than she cared to admit, not out of any personal concern for Thorn's well-being, she told herself, but because the blood oath would not consider the debt repaid if he died from his injuries. She had found shelter in a small cave at the base of a rocky outcropping, hidden from casual observation by a curtain of withered vegetation. It wasn't much, but it would protect them from the worst of the sun's heat and prying eyes. Checking that Thorn was securely bound. Blood oath or no, she wasn't foolish enough to leave a dangerous enemy unrestrained. Rin ventured out to scout their surroundings and search for water. The markings on her arm pulsed whenever she strayed too far from him, a constant reminder of the mystical tether that bound them together. The landscape of the charred wastes was as unforgiving as its name suggested, a vast expanse of cracked earth and twisted, blackened vegetation, the result of experimental weapons deployed in the early days of the war. Few creatures survived here, and fewer still found it hospitable enough to call home. Yet Rin knew that somewhere within this desolation lay hidden oases, small pockets of life that had somehow endured. Her survival training had included maps of these precious water sources, though finding them without proper equipment would test her skills to their limit. After an hour of careful searching, she discovered a small spring seeping from between rocks at the base of a cliff. The water was brackish but potable, and Rin filled her canteen gratefully before making her way back to the cave. She returned to find Thorn awake, his gray eyes clear, despite the fever that had begun to set in. He watched her silently as she entered, making no move to test his bonds. "Captain Kale," he acknowledged, his voice hoarse. "I assume there's a reason you've taken me prisoner rather than killing me when you had the chance." Rin set down her canteen and regarded him coldly. "Don't mistake this for mercy, Thorn. If I had any choice in the matter, I would have left you to burn with that fortress." A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, pulling at the wound on his cheek. "And yet here we are. I'm curious about what happened back there with your sword. I've never seen anything like it." Rin hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Knowledge of the Blood Oath Law could potentially give him leverage over her, but he had witnessed the phenomenon himself. Denying it would serve little purpose. "It's called the Blood Oath Law," she said, finally keeping her explanation deliberately vague. "An ancient magic tied to my family's sword." "And what exactly does this Blood Oath Law entail?" Thorn pressed his gaze sharp, despite his weakened state. "It means I'm stuck with you until the oath is fulfilled." Rin snapped, her frustration evident. "Your blood touched my blade, and now I'm bound to ensure your safety." Thorn's eyebrows rose in surprise. Then he let out a short, incredulous laugh that quickly transformed into a pained cough. "The irony is almost poetic. The Alliance's finest warrior compelled to protect her enemy." "Don't test my patience," Rin warned. "The oath compels me to keep you alive, not comfortable." She moved closer, uncapping the canteen. "You need water. That wound is infected and fever's setting in." Despite his obvious thirst, Thorn eyed the canteen suspiciously. "How do I know it's not poisoned?" "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't waste good water doing it," Rin retorted. "Besides, the oath wouldn't allow me to harm you directly." After a moment's consideration, Thorn nodded, allowing her to help him drink. When he had taken his fill, Rin set about examining his wound more closely. "This needs cleaning and proper medication," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "We need to find a settlement." "The nearest Alliance outpost is 3 days' journey northeast," Thorn said. Rin shook her head. "We can't risk an Alliance post. They'd execute you on sight oath or no oath." "And any Charred Throne settlement would do the same to you," Thorn pointed out. "So where does that leave us?" Rin considered their options. "There's a neutral trading post at the edge of the wastes, run by nomads. They deal with both sides of the conflict and ask no questions as long as you can pay." "And can we pay?" In response, Rin pulled out a small pouch from inside her armor, revealing a collection of gemstones, her emergency resources. "This should be enough to buy supplies and perhaps passage further away from the fighting." Thorn studied her with newfound curiosity. "You've thought this through." "I'm a captain of the Alliance," Rin replied stiffly. "Strategic planning is what I do." "And what's your strategy here, Captain? How does this end for us?" It was the question Rin had been asking herself since the moment the Blood Oath had been invoked. "I don't know," she admitted. "The texts speak of the debt being repaid, but they're vague on the specifics. It could be a matter of saving your life in turn, or it might require something more substantial." "So we're bound together indefinitely." Thorn mused the gravity of their situation, seemingly sinking in. "Both hunted by our respective forces, unable to return to our lives until some mystical condition is met." "That about sums it up," Rin agreed grimly. A silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of their shared predicament. Finally, Thorn spoke again. "If we're to survive this, we'll need to establish some ground rules. A truce of sorts." Rin arched an eyebrow. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate terms, Thorn." "On the contrary," he countered. "You need my cooperation as much as I need your protection. If I choose to make this difficult for you to call out to patrols or attempt escape at the first opportunity, your oath becomes significantly harder to fulfill." As much as she hated to admit it, he had a point. Dragging an unwilling prisoner across the charred wastes would be virtually impossible, especially if they needed to avoid detection. "What do you propose?" she asked cautiously. "Simple. You untie me and I give you my word that I won't attempt to escape or alert others to our presence. In return, you share your plans with me and consider my input. We work together to solve this predicament, and once we're free of it, we return to our respective sides. No grudges, no retribution for what transpires, while we're bound by the oath." Rin studied him intently, searching for any sign of deception. The blood oath thrummed steadily within her, neither encouraging nor discouraging his proposal. This decision would be hers alone. "And I'm supposed to trust the word of the Butcher of Neverdale?" she asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Something flashed in Thorn's eyes, pain, perhaps, or regret. "I understand your hatred, Captain. But ask yourself this, what choice do you have?" He was right, and they both knew it. With a reluctant nod, Rin moved forward and began to untie his bonds. "If you betray this agreement," she warned, "oath or no oath, I will make you regret it." Thorn rubbed his wrists as the ropes fell away, his gaze never leaving hers. "I believe you would, Captain, but it won't come to that." As night fell once more, they prepared to continue their journey under the cover of darkness. The fever had worsened, despite Rin's attempts to clean the wound, and Thorn's steps were unsteady as they set out across the barren landscape. "The trading post is 2 days' journey from here," Rin informed him, as they picked their way through the darkness. "If we maintain a steady pace and avoid detection, we should reach it by the second nightfall." Thorn nodded, conserving his strength for the journey ahead. Despite his weakened condition, he moved with the disciplined efficiency of a career soldier, adapting to Rin's pace and following her lead without complaint. They traveled in silence for the most part, each lost in their own thoughts. Occasionally, Thorn would ask a question about the blood oath, seeking to understand the magic that had so drastically altered both their lives. Rin answered as best she could, though many aspects of the ancient law remained mysteries, even to her. "In all the histories of my family," she explained, as they paused to rest near dawn, "the blood oath has only been invoked a handful of times. Most were deliberate ceremonies between allies to formalize pacts of protection. There are few accounts of it occurring accidentally in battle, as ours did." "And in those cases," Thorn pressed, "how was the debt repaid?" Rin hesitated. "The records are unclear. Some suggest acts of equal value, a life for a life. Others imply that only death can break the bond." "Whose death, yours or mine?" "Either, I suppose," Rin admitted. "Though killing you would defeat the purpose of the oath itself, so I doubt that's the solution." Thorn fell silent for a time, contemplating this information. "What was in that container?" he finally asked, changing the subject. "The one my men uncovered at Harris Fortress." Rin's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "I was hoping you could tell me. Your forces seemed quite intent on retrieving it." "I was following orders," Thorn replied, his tone suddenly guarded. "Retrieving an artifact of historical significance, or so I was told." "Historical significance doesn't typically cause explosions capable of leveling fortresses," Rin pointed out dryly. Thorn sighed, wincing as the action pulled at his wounded cheek. "No, it doesn't. And if I'm being honest, I had my suspicions about the mission from the start. The level of secrecy, the insistence that I personally oversee the operation. It didn't align with standard protocol." "You think you were set up?" "I think there's more happening within the Charred Throne's high command than I've been made privy to," Thorn said carefully. "Whatever was in that container, it was clearly more dangerous than I was led to believe." Rin considered his words, searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, she slowly nodded. "The symbols on the container, they were similar to those on my sword. Ancient Elorian script. Could they be connected, your blood oath law and whatever was inside that container?" "It's possible," Rin conceded. "The oldest magics of Eloria often share common origins. But without more information, it's impossible to say for certain." As the first rays of sunlight began to peek over the horizon, they sought shelter once more, finding a shallow depression beneath an overhanging rock. The heat of the day would make travel impossible, forcing them to rest until nightfall. Thorn's condition had deteriorated further during their night's journey. The fever burned hotter now, and the infection had spread angry red lines extending from the wound across his face and down his neck. Without proper medical attention, Rin knew he wouldn't survive much longer. As he drifted into a fitful sleep, Rin kept watch, her hand resting on Lumina's hilt. The sword hummed softly in response to her touch, the runes on her arm glowing faintly in the dim light of their shelter. She found herself studying Thorn's face in repose, the harsh lines of command softened by unconsciousness. The Butcher of Neverdale, responsible for thousands of Alliance deaths, now lay helpless before her. And yet, bound by the blood oath, she could do nothing but protect him, a cruel twist of fate that challenged everything she believed about justice and duty. But there was something else troubling her as well. Something about Thorn himself that didn't align with the monster depicted in Alliance propaganda. His actions since their capture had been honorable, his words thoughtful and measured. Could a man capable of such atrocities also display such dignity in defeat? Rin shook her head, banishing such dangerous thoughts. Humanizing the enemy was a weakness she could ill afford, oath or no oath. Thorn was still the enemy, and once the blood oath was fulfilled, they would return to opposite sides of a war that had already claimed too many lives. With that resolve firmly in place, Rin settled in for the long day ahead, unaware that their journey was about to take an unexpected and deadly turn. The sandstorm struck without warning. They had resumed their trek at dusk, taking advantage of the cooler night air to make up for time lost during Thorn's fever-induced rest stops. Rin had noticed the change in the air, first a heaviness, a shift in the wind's direction that stirred the fine dust at their feet. "We need to find shelter," she said urgently, scanning the barren landscape. "Quickly!" Thorn, leaning heavily on a staff fashioned from deadwood, didn't question her assessment. Together, they increased their pace, searching desperately for any formation that might offer protection from the approaching storm. The wind picked up rapidly, transforming from a gentle breeze to a howling gale in a matter of minutes. Visibility dropped to mere meters as the air filled with swirling particles of sand and dust, each grain a tiny projectile capable of stripping flesh from bone, given enough time and force. "There!" Thorn shouted over the rising din, pointing to a dark shape looming ahead, the skeletal remains of a transport vehicle half buried in the sand, a relic from the earlier days of the war. They staggered toward it, fighting against the wind that threatened to knock them off their feet. Reaching the wreckage, Rin quickly assessed its stability before helping Thorn inside. The rusted hull provided minimal shelter, but it was better than nothing. As they huddled within the confined space, the storm unleashed its full fury upon the wastes. The sound was deafening metal, groaning under the assault sand, hissing, as it scoured every surface wind, shrieking through gaps in the hull, like 1,000 tortured souls. "Will it hold?" Thorn asked, his voice barely audible above the cacophony. Rin nodded, though her confidence was far from absolute. "It's weathered storms before. See how it's anchored in the sand? The worst of the wind should pass over us." Hours crawled by each moment, a test of endurance as the temperature plummeted with nightfall, and the storm showed no signs of abating. Despite the cold, Thorn's fever burned hot, his breathing becoming increasingly labored. "We're losing time," Rin muttered, more to herself than to him. "That wound needs proper treatment." Thorn opened his eyes, clarity returning briefly through the haze of fever. "Tell me something, Captain. Why did you join the Alliance?" The question caught Rin off guard. "What does that matter now?" "Humor a dying man," he replied with a weak smile. "You're not dying," Rin said firmly, though they both knew it was a lie. "And I joined because I believed in what the Alliance stands for: peace, unity, the protection of all Aelorians." "Noble sentiments," Thorn acknowledged. "And not so different from what drew me to the Charred Throne, believe it or not." Rin scoffed. "The throne stands for domination, for subjugating those who oppose its rule. Is that what they tell you? Thorn asked, his tone genuinely curious, rather than confrontational. Because we're told the Alliance seeks to strip away our cultural identity, to enforce a homogeneous society where our traditions are forbidden. That's propaganda, Rin protested. The Alliance respects diverse cultures. As does the throne, Thorn countered. Or so we're led to believe. A troubled silence fell between them, broken only by the relentless howl of the storm outside. Rin found herself questioning beliefs she had held as absolute truths. Could it really be so simple as propaganda on both sides, manipulating loyal soldiers into fighting a war based on misconceptions? If what you say is true, she said finally, then why are we fighting at all? Thorn's expression darkened. That, Captain, is the question that has been troubling me for some time now, particularly after receiving certain unusual orders, such as retrieving mysterious artifacts from ruined fortresses, Rin suggested. Among others, Thorn confirmed. Orders that seemed designed to prolong conflict rather than achieve victory. Tactical decisions that made little strategic sense, but ensured maximum casualties on both sides. Rin frowned, recalling similar puzzling directives from Alliance Command in recent months. You think someone is deliberately perpetuating the war? I think, Thorn began, but his words were cut short as a violent tremor shook their shelter. The metal hull groaned ominously, sand pouring in through newly formed gaps in the structure. We need to move, Rin shouted, grabbing Thorn by the arm and pulling him toward the exit. The whole thing's coming down! They barely made it out before the transport collapsed behind them, crushed under the weight of accumulated sand. Outside, the full force of the storm hit them like a physical blow, driving them to their knees. Visibility was non-existent, the world reduced to a howling void of swirling particles. Rin kept a death grip on Thorn's arm, knowing that separation in these conditions would mean certain death for both of them. We can't stay here, she yelled into his ear. We need to keep moving. Which way? Thorn shouted back, his voice nearly lost to the wind. Rin had no answer. In the chaos of the storm, all sense of direction had been obliterated. But standing still was not an option. They would be buried alive within minutes. With no choice but to trust her instincts, Rin began to lead them forward one agonizing step at a time. The blood oath markings on her arm burned fiercely, as if the ancient magic itself was fighting to keep them alive. Time lost all meaning as they struggled through the maelstrom. It could have been minutes or hours that they staggered blindly through the wasteland, each breath a battle against the sand-filled air, each step a victory against the wind that sought to throw them down. When Rin's foot met empty air instead of solid ground, she barely had time to realize they had reached the edge of a ravine before they were tumbling downward, the world spinning around them as they fell. The impact drove the breath from her lungs, stars exploding across her vision as her head struck stone. Through the haze of pain, she registered that the howling of the wind had diminished. They had fallen into some kind of sheltered depression, partially protected from the full fury of the storm. Thorn, she called out, panic rising, as she realized she no longer felt his presence beside her. Valak! A groan answered her from nearby, and Rin crawled toward the sound, her body protesting every movement. She found Thorn lying on his back, blood trickling from a fresh cut on his forehead, to mix with the sand that coated his skin. Are you all right? She asked, hands moving quickly to check for broken bones or more serious injuries. Define all right, he muttered, wincing, as he attempted to sit up. Nothing seems broken, if that's what you're asking. Relief flooded through Rin stronger than she cared to admit. We need to find better shelter. This ravine offers some protection, but if the storm shifts direction... Wait, Thorn interrupted, staring past her with narrowed eyes. Do you see that? Rin turned to follow his gaze. Through the swirling dust, a faint glow was visible further down the ravine, steady artificial light that could only be man-made. A settlement, she wondered aloud. Or a trap, Thorn cautioned. But given our options... Rin nodded in agreement. Let's approach carefully. Supporting each other, they made their way toward the light, alert for any sign of danger. As they drew closer, the source became clear, a small entrance set into the ravine wall, illuminated by glowing crystals, similar to those used in Alliance outposts. Above the entrance, weathered symbols had been carved into the stone neutral markers, indicating a healing sanctuary, one of the few institutions respected by both sides of the conflict. A healer's den. Rin breathed hope, surging within her. If anyone can treat your wound. Without further hesitation, she knocked firmly on the wooden door. After a moment, it swung open to reveal a tall, slender woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes so pale they appeared almost colorless in the dim light. Sanctuary. Rin stated formally, using the traditional request for aid. The woman's gaze moved from Rin's Alliance uniform to Thorn's charred throne insignia, taking in their battered condition and the obvious infection ravaging Thorn's face. Enemies seeking shelter together, she observed, her voice melodious, despite its neutral tone. How unusual. Please, Rin urged. He needs medical attention. After a moment's consideration, the woman stepped aside. Sanctuary granted. I am Elandra. Leave your weapons by the door. The interior of the sanctuary was a stark contrast to the desolation outside, warm, well-lit, and filled with the soothing scent of healing herbs. Shelves lined the walls stocked with jars, bottles, and bundles of dried plants. In the center of the main chamber, a fire burned in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the earthen floor. Sit, Elandra directed, pointing Thorn toward a pallet near the fire. That infection has nearly reached your bloodstream. A few more hours and no medicine would have saved you. As the healer set about gathering supplies, Rin hovered nearby the blood oath, compelling her to remain close despite the assurance of safety within the sanctuary. You may rest, Alliance Captain, Elandra said without looking up from her work. No harm will come to either of you under my roof. The sanctity of healing is my only allegiance. Thank you for your aid, Rin replied, though she made no move to distance herself. How did a healing sanctuary come to be established in the middle of the charred wastes? The wastes were not always charred. Elandra answered her hands, moving deftly as she mixed powders and liquids in a small bowl. This ravine once housed a thriving community before your war scorched the earth and drove the survivors away. The rebuke in her words was subtle, but clear, directed not at Rin personally, but at the conflict itself. Before Rin could respond, Elandra continued. I remained because the wounded need a healer regardless of which insignia they wear. She approached Thorn. With the mixture, she had prepared a paste that gave off a sharp medicinal odor. This will burn, she warned before applying it to the infected wound. Thorn's jaw clenched, but he made no sound as the medicine made contact with raw flesh. His discipline, even in the face of extreme pain, reluctantly impressed Rin. The two of you are bound, Elandra stated suddenly, her gaze moving between them with newfound interest. I can sense the magic that links your life forces. Rin instinctively touched the markings on her arm. Yes, the Blood Oath Law. Elandra's pale eyes widened. The Blood Oath, I had thought such magic lost to the ages. Apparently not, Thorn remarked dryly, wincing, as Elandra continued her ministrations. And this occurred during battle, the healer asked. When Rin nodded confirmation, Elandra shook her head in wonder. Extraordinary. The ancient texts speak of the Blood Oath as a sacred ceremony conducted willingly by both parties. For it to manifest in combat? Can you tell us how to break it? Rin asked, hope kindling within her. Elandra finished bandaging Thorn's wound before answering. Breaking such a bond is not a simple matter. The Blood Oath is one of the oldest magics of Aloria, dating back to the time when the bloodline transmission technology was first developed. Bloodline transmission, Thorn repeated, exchanging a glance with Rin. What is that? An ancient science lost for millennia or so, it was believed, Elandra replied. It allowed the transfer of abilities, memories, even life force itself, through blood connections. The Blood Oath was one application of this technology, binding protector to protected through a sacred exchange. A chill ran down Rin's spine. The container at Harris Fortress, it had symbols, similar to those on my sword. And it released a pulse of red energy when breached. Thorn added, realization dawning in his eyes. Blood-red energy. Elandra's expression grew grave. If what you describe is true, then someone has rediscovered the secrets of bloodline transmission. And in the wrong hands, such power could be devastating. How so? Rin pressed. Imagine an army whose soldiers could transfer their strength to a single warrior, creating an unstoppable force, Elandra explained. Or commanders who could sacrifice their troops to heal their own wounds, treating lives as mere currency. The possibilities for abuse are endless. The implications were staggering. If either the Alliance or the Charred Throne gained exclusive control of such technology, the balance of power would shift irrevocably. This is what they've been searching for, Thorn murmured, his earlier suspicions seemingly confirmed. This is why certain conflicts were engineered, why certain territories were deemed essential to control. They've been mapping the locations of ancient artifacts, Rin concluded, the pieces falling into place, using us soldiers on both sides as pawns in their archaeological treasure hunt. Elandra moved to a bookshelf, retrieving an aged tome, bound in what appeared to be leather, but gleamed with an unnatural iridescence. If you truly wish to understand the Blood Oath and its connection to this rediscovered technology, you must learn its history. She opened the book, revealing pages covered in the same ancient script that adorned Lumina. This is one of the few surviving texts that details the original applications of bloodline transmission before it was outlawed by the First Council of Aloria. Can you read it? Rin asked. Parts, Elandra admitted. My knowledge of the ancient language is incomplete, but what I can decipher suggests that the Blood Oath was created as a safeguard, a way to ensure that those who wielded the power of blood magic would be bound by strict codes of honor. And how is the oath fulfilled? Thorn asked the question that had been haunting them both. Elandra turned several pages before stopping at an illustration depicting two figures, one kneeling before the other. According to this, when blood is given freely in equal measure to that which was taken, the debt is balanced and the bond dissolved. Blood given freely, Rin repeated. So Thorn would need to willingly shed his blood for me as I drew his in battle. Not necessarily for you, Elandra corrected, but for a cause you deem worthy. The text speaks of intention rather than recipient. It is the willing sacrifice that matters, not who benefits from it. Thorn considered this information thoughtfully. And if this sacrifice were made in service of exposing the truth about the bloodline transmission technology, of preventing its misuse, that would likely satisfy the conditions of the oath, Elandra confirmed. A plan began to form in Rin's mind, dangerous, perhaps even suicidal, but offering a path forward that aligned with both the dictates of the Blood Oath and her own sense of duty. The Dragonspine Fortress, she said, turning to Thorn. That's where the High Command of the Charred Throne conducts its most sensitive research, isn't it? Thorn's expression remained carefully neutral. I'm not at liberty to confirm or deny. We're beyond such pretenses now, Major, Rin interrupted. If what Elandra says is true, both our forces are being manipulated by those who seek to exploit this ancient technology. Thousands have died in service of their ambitions, and thousands more will follow, unless the truth is exposed. For a long moment, Thorn remained silent, internal conflict evident in his eyes. Then, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. Yes, Dragonspine houses our most advanced research facilities buried deep beneath the mountain. Security is impenetrable. Not if you're the one leading the way, Rin pointed out. A high-ranking officer returning from a mission presumed failed. They'd be suspicious, Thorn argued. My disappearance following the Harris Fortress incident would raise questions. Then we create a convincing story. You escaped captivity, eliminated your Alliance captor, and discovered critical information in the process. And where would you be during this charade? Rin smiled grimly. Right beside you, though, not as your prisoner. The Blood Oath won't allow me to stray far from your side, remember. We'll need to find a way to smuggle me in. Thorn shook his head in disbelief. This is madness. Even if we could penetrate Dragonspine's defenses, even if we could locate whatever research they're conducting on this bloodline transmission technology, what then? How do we expose it without being killed in the process? The Celestial Council, Elandra, interjected, drawing their attention back to her. The neutral governing body that oversees disputes between the Alliance and the throne. If you could present evidence to them, both sides would be forced to acknowledge it. Getting to the Council would be just as dangerous as infiltrating Dragonspine, Thorn pointed out. One impossible task at a time, Rin replied dryly. First, we confirm that this technology is being developed at Dragonspine. Then, we worry about exposing it to the Council. Elandra closed the ancient tome and returned it to its shelf. Whatever you decide, you cannot leave until the storm passes and the Major's condition improves. That gives you time to refine your plan. As if to emphasize her point, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the sanctuary's door, a reminder of the tempest that continued to rage outside. Rest now, the healer advised. Clarity comes with recovery. Recognizing the wisdom in her words, Rin finally allowed herself to settle onto a pallet near Thorn's, though still within the radius that the blood oath permitted. As exhaustion overtook her, she found her thoughts drifting to the impossible task ahead, infiltrating the heart of enemy territory, uncovering a conspiracy that spanned both sides of the conflict, and somehow living long enough to expose it. Yet, beneath the practical concerns, lay a deeper unease. In the short time since the blood oath had bound them together, her perception of Valak Thorn had shifted dramatically. The monster of Alliance propaganda had been replaced by a man of principle and honor, one who seemed as disturbed by the potential misuse of power as she was. What other truths might be shattered before their journey's end? And when the blood oath was finally fulfilled, could they truly return to being enemies? These questions followed Rin into uneasy dreams, where blood flowed like rivers and ancient magic pulsed in rhythm with her beating heart. Days passed within the sanctuary, as Thorn's condition gradually improved under Elandra's expert care. The sandstorm eventually subsided, leaving behind a transformed landscape dunes, where there had been flat terrain, exposed ruins previously buried beneath the sand, new pathways carved by the relentless wind. During this time of enforced rest, Rin and Thorn used the opportunity to refine their plan, poring over maps that Elandra provided and debating various approaches to infiltrating Dragonspine Fortress. The main entrance is heavily guarded, Thorn explained, as they studied the rough schematic he had drawn from memory. Retinal scans, blood analysis, the works. But there's a secondary access point used for maintenance and emergency evacuation. Still guarded, Rin asked. Yes, but with a more straightforward verification process. If I can get us that far, my authorization codes should grant us entry. Rin traced the path with her finger. And once inside, where would this bloodline transmission research be conducted? Level 5, Thorn replied without hesitation. The deepest level of the facility. Access is restricted to those with alpha clearance. Which you have? A shadow crossed Thorn's face. No. Only the High Command and lead researchers possess that level of clearance. My rank grants me beta clearance enough to enter level 4, but no further. Rin frowned. Then how do we reach the research? There may be a way, Elandra interjected, joining their discussion. The blood oath creates a unique connection between you. In the ancient texts, it's said that those bound by such magic can sometimes share more than just obligation. They can share abilities, senses, even access to restricted domains. You're suggesting the oath might help us bypass security? Thorn asked skeptically. I'm suggesting it might blur the lines between your identities in ways that mechanical systems cannot detect, Elandra clarified. The magic predates our technology by millennia. It operates on principles we barely understand. Rin considered this possibility. It's a thin hope to stake our lives on. Do we have alternatives? Thorn countered. They didn't, and all three of them knew it. Their plan flawed as it was represented their only chance of uncovering the truth and potentially ending a war that had consumed countless lives. As the day of departure approached, Elandra provided them with supplies, medicines, preserved food water, purification tablets, and clothing that would allow Rin to pass as a civilian contractor, commonly employed by the Charred Throne for menial tasks. "Your sword will be the greatest challenge," the healer noted, as Rin reluctantly prepared to conceal Lumina beneath her new attire. "Its energy signature is distinctive." "I can't leave it behind," Rin stated firmly. "The blood oath is tied to the blade as much as to me." "Then we'll have to hope your disguise and the Major's authority are sufficient to deflect scrutiny," Elandra replied. On the eve of their departure, the healer presented them with one final gift: small vials containing a luminescent blue liquid. "Bloodroot extract," she explained, "a cousin to the ancient magics you seek to understand. If ingested, it temporarily enhances the connection between those bound by blood. Use it only in dire need. Its effects are unpredictable and can strain the heart beyond safe limits." Rin accepted the vial with solemn gratitude. "We can never repay your kindness, Elandra." The healer smiled sadly. "End this war. That will be payment enough." They set out at dawn, heading southeast toward the jagged peaks that marked the border of Charred Throne territory. The journey would take 4 days on foot, traversing terrain that grew increasingly treacherous as the wastes gave way to volcanic badlands. Despite the physical challenges, Rin found herself drawing strength from an unexpected source conversation with Thorn. As they walked, they shared stories of their lives before the war, discovering commonalities that transcended the artificial boundaries of national identity. "My father was a stonemason," Thorn revealed as they navigated a particularly difficult stretch of solidified lava flows. "He built monuments that still stand in the capital. He believed in creating things that would outlast him legacy, through creation, rather than destruction." "He would be disappointed by your choice of profession then," Rin observed, though, without the bitterness that would have colored such a comment days earlier. Thorn smiled ruefully. "He was. He never understood why I joined the military. He died believing I had betrayed his values." "And had you—" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that extended far beyond one man's relationship with his father. "I thought I was protecting those values," Thorn answered finally. "Defending our way of life, our traditions, our future. Now, I'm no longer certain what I've been fighting for all these years." Rin understood his doubt all too well. Her own convictions, once unshakable, had been severely tested by the revelations of recent days. "We've both been pawns," she said softly. "The question now is whether we can become players instead." On the 4th day, the imposing silhouette of Dragonspine Fortress came into view, a massive structure embedded into the side of a mountain, its architecture a blend of ancient stone and modern reinforcements. Even from a distance, the defensive capabilities were evident: gun emplacements, sensor arrays patrolling guards, and mechanized sentries. "Intimidating, isn't it?" Thorn remarked, as they observed from the cover of a ridge several kilometers away. "Designed to be impregnable." "Every fortress has its weakness," Rin replied, though her confidence was more performance than reality. "We stick to the plan. You approach openly, presenting yourself as having escaped Alliance captivity. I follow as your prisoner, supposedly valuable for intelligence purposes. And when we reach the secondary entrance, I create a distraction while you neutralize the guards non-lethally," Rin emphasized. Thorn nodded in agreement. "Then we proceed to level 4 using my clearance and attempt to access level 5 using whatever advantage the Blood Oath might provide." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. As night fell, they made their final preparations, checking weapons, reviewing security protocols, and steeling themselves for what lay ahead. "If we succeed," Rin said as they prepared to move out, "the war could end, thousands of lives saved." "And if we fail?" Rin met his gaze steadily. "Then we die knowing we tried to do what was right, rather than what was ordered." Something shifted in Thorn's expression, a newfound resolve that matched her own. Let's make sure we succeed then. They approached the fortress, under cover of darkness, navigating security patrols with the expertise of veteran soldiers. As planned, when they neared the secondary entrance, Thorn stepped forward alone, hands raised to show he carried no weapons. Major Valak Thorn, identification code, Alpha 79 Delta Epsilon. He called out as spotlights swung to illuminate him. Returning from field operation at Harris Fortress with high-value prisoner, guards swarmed around him, weapons raised until verification came through their communication systems. Rin, playing her role as captive, kept her head lowered as she was roughly searched and relieved of her visible weapons. Lumina, disguised as a common sword and hidden beneath her outer garments, remained undetected, whether by luck or some property of the Blood Oath, magic she couldn't be sure. "Sir, we had reports you were killed in action," one of the guards said, confusion evident in his tone. "Exaggerated," Thorn replied coolly. "I was captured by Alliance forces but managed to escape, bringing this officer with me. She has information on Alliance movements that Command will want to hear immediately." The guard hesitated, protocol warring with deference to rank. "Sir, standard procedure requires debriefing before—" "I'm well aware of standard procedure, Sergeant," Thorn interrupted, his voice hardening with authority. "But there's nothing standard about the intelligence this prisoner carries. Now, are you going to continue wasting time, or shall we proceed?" The guard snapped to attention. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. This way, please." As they were escorted through the entrance, Rin caught Thorn's eye briefly. The first hurdle had been cleared, but the real challenges lay ahead. The interior of Dragonspine revealed itself to be a marvel of engineering. Vast chambers carved into the living rock of the mountain, reinforced with steel, and concrete buzzing with activity, even at this late hour. Soldiers, scientists, and support personnel moved with purpose through well-lit corridors, none giving more than a passing glance to the returning major and his captive. Their escorts led them to a security checkpoint where Thorn's identity was verified through more rigorous means: retinal scan, palm print, voice analysis. Each test caused Rin's anxiety to spike, but Thorn maintained his composure, projecting the confident authority expected of an officer of his rank. "Verification complete, Major Thorn," the security officer announced. "Welcome back to Dragonspine. Medical has been notified of your return and requests your presence for standard post-mission evaluation." Thorn waved away the concern. "That can wait. My prisoner needs to be secured first, and I have time-sensitive information for Command." "Sir, protocol state—" Sergeant Thorn cut in, leaning forward slightly. "This prisoner was present at Harris Fortress when the artifact was breached. She's been exposed to whatever energy was released. Do you really want to delay containment while we debate protocols?" The mention of the Harris Fortress incident had an immediate effect. The security officer's expression shifted from bureaucratic obstinance to alarm. "Understood, sir. I'll authorize temporary holding in the Level 3 detention area until proper quarantine can be arranged." "Level 4 would be more secure," Thorn suggested, given the sensitive nature of her exposure. After a moment's hesitation, the officer nodded. "I'll update the authorization. Please proceed to Elevator Bank C for a Level 4 access." As they moved away from the checkpoint, Rin murmured under her breath, "Impressive manipulation." "Not manipulation," Thorn corrected quietly. "Just leveraging their own secrecy against them. Nobody wants to admit they don't know what happened at Harris, so they err on the side of caution." They reached the elevator bank without further incident, entering a car alone after Thorn dismissed their escorts, with a curt order about preparing adequate restraints in the detention area. As soon as the doors closed, Rin allowed herself a small sigh of relief. So far, so good. But this is where it gets complicated. The elevator panel showed 6 levels, with the 5th and 6th requiring additional security clearance. Thorn pressed the button for Level 4, and the car began its descent deep into the mountain's heart. "Once we reach detention, we'll have perhaps 15 minutes before someone realizes we haven't arrived," Thorn calculated. "We need to locate access to Level 5 within that window." Rin nodded mentally, reviewing the rough schematic they had memorized. There should be a maintenance shaft near the southeastern quadrant of Level 4-1, of the few direct connections that bypasses standard security. The elevator slowed to a stop, doors sliding open to reveal a sterile corridor bathed in harsh white light. Unlike the upper levels with their constant activity level, 4 appeared relatively deserted, a blessing that would aid their covert movement. With Thorn leading, and Rin following in the guise of a subdued prisoner, they navigated the labyrinthine passageways of the detention level, passing occasional security personnel, who saluted Thorn without question. "Southeast quadrant," Thorn murmured as they rounded a corner. "We're close." "Major Thorn," a voice called from behind them. "A moment, please." They turned to see a woman in a laboratory coat approaching, tablet in hand. Her insignia identified her as part of the research division, precisely the complication they had hoped to avoid. "Dr. Varen." Thorn acknowledged his expression, revealing nothing of the tension Rin could feel radiating from him. "I wasn't aware you were still on duty. When we received word of your return, I was asked to assess your prisoner's exposure to the Harris artifact." The scientist explained, her gaze shifting to Rin with clinical interest. "Particularly given your own proximity to the event." "I was planning to secure the prisoner before reporting for assessment," Thorn replied smoothly. Dr. Varen shook her head. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. High Command has issued specific instructions regarding anyone connected to the Harris incident. Both of you need to come with me immediately." This was the moment their plan began to unravel. Rin could sense Thorn's calculations, weighing the risks of compliance against the suspicion that would arise from refusal. "Very well, Doctor," he conceded. "Lead the way." As they followed the scientist through a different section of the level, Rin felt the weight of Lumina against her back, hidden but ready. If their cover was blown, escape would be virtually impossible, but not before she fulfilled the blood oath, by ensuring Thorn's safety, even at the cost of her own life. Dr. Varen led them to a laboratory complex where several technicians worked at various stations, monitoring equipment Rin didn't recognize. In the center of the room stood an examination table surrounded by scanning apparatus that emitted a soft hum. "Major, if you would wait here," Varen directed, pointing to a small anteroom. "We'll begin with your prisoner, then process you afterward." Thorn hesitated, and Rin could read the conflict in his eyes, concern for her safety, warring with the need to maintain their cover. "I'd prefer to observe," he stated. "This prisoner possesses intelligence critical to our operations." "I assure you, Major, we're only interested in her physiological responses to the artifact's energy signature," Varen replied. "Any intelligence she carries will remain intact." The impasse was broken by the arrival of another figure, a man whose uniform bore the insignia of the highest echelons of Charred Throne Command. General Corvus, head of military research and development, entered the laboratory with the confident stride of one accustomed to absolute authority. "Major Thorn." He greeted, his tone pleasant, but his eyes sharp with assessment. "Your return is quite the surprise. Our intelligence suggested you perished at Harris Fortress." "The Alliance captured me, sir," Thorn explained, saluting crisply. "I escaped and managed to bring this officer with me. She was present when the artifact was activated." Corvus circled Rin, slowly, studying her with unnerving intensity. "And you believed bringing her directly to Dragonspine was prudent, rather than to a standard detention facility for initial processing?" "Given the nature of the Harris operation, sir, I thought it best to deliver her directly to those most familiar with the artifact." The general nodded thoughtfully. "Logical enough. Though one wonders why you didn't report in via standard channels once you escaped Alliance custody." "Communications were compromised, sir. I had reason to believe Alliance forces were monitoring all frequencies." "I see." Corvus gestured to the examination table. "Dr. Varen, proceed with your assessment. Major Thorn, you'll remain here with me. I'm curious to hear more details about your captivity and escape." The moment of crisis had arrived. If Thorn were separated from Rin, the blood oath would make it impossible for her to proceed without him. Already, she could feel the markings on her arm beginning to burn as the prospective distance between them grew. Before any of them could move, an alarm blared through the facility. Not the intruder alert they had feared, but something else entirely. Containment breach in research sublevel. A computerized voice announced, "All personnel implement Protocol Omega. This is not a drill." The laboratory erupted into controlled chaos as technicians abandoned their stations and moved toward emergency stations. Dr. Varon turned to General Corvus, panic evident in her expression. "Sir, the Phase 3 trials." "I am aware," Dr. Corvus interrupted sharply. "Secure your station and proceed to the designated shelter." To Thorne, he added, "Major, take your prisoner to Detention Block C and lock down. I'll deal with your debriefing after this situation is contained." Without waiting for acknowledgement, the general strode from the laboratory, already issuing orders through his communication device. The unexpected reprieve left Thorne and Rin momentarily alone, as the remaining staff focused on emergency procedures rather than the prisoner and her escort. "This is our chance," Rin whispered urgently. "Whatever's happening might give us the cover we need to reach level 5. Thorne nodded in agreement. "The containment breach will have triggered automatic security protocols. Certain barriers will be lowered while others are raised. We need to move quickly before the system resets." Taking advantage of the confusion, they slipped from the laboratory and into the now deserted corridor. The emergency lighting cast everything in a pulsing red glow, adding to the surreal atmosphere as they navigated toward the maintenance shaft they had originally sought. "There," Thorne indicated, pointing to a nondescript panel set into the wall. "That should lead directly to level 5. As he worked to bypass the security lock, Rin kept watch, her hand resting on Lumina's concealed hilt. The blood oath markings on her arm pulsed in rhythm with the emergency lights, as if responding to the heightened tension of the moment. "Got it," Thorne announced as the panel slid open, revealing a narrow vertical shaft with service ladder. "Ladies first." Despite the gravity of their situation, Rin found herself smiling at the incongruous courtesy. "Age before beauty," she countered, gesturing for him to lead. The shaft descended into darkness, illuminated only by occasional emergency lights that cast more shadows than they dispelled. They climbed down in silence each rung of the ladder, bringing them closer to the heart of the Charred Throne's most guarded secrets, and potentially to the truth that could end the war. When they finally reached the bottom, they emerged into a corridor that differed markedly from the levels above. The sterile military efficiency had been replaced by an environment that seemed more akin to a research university laboratories, with glass walls revealing complex equipment workstations, filled with data displays, and most surprisingly, a distinct lack of armed guards. "Where is everyone?" Rin wondered aloud. "Evacuated to safe locations, I assume," Thorne replied. "The containment breach protocols are designed to minimize personnel exposure." "Exposure to what exactly?" Thorne's expression darkened. "That's what we're here to find out." Moving cautiously through the deserted research level, they examined room after room of scientific equipment, most of its purpose obscure to their military-trained eyes. It wasn't until they reached a large chamber at the far end of the main corridor that they found what they were seeking. The room was dominated by a central platform, where a familiar metal container rested identical to the one they had seen at Harris Fortress, but intact. Surrounding it were sophisticated analysis devices and monitoring stations, all active despite the evacuation. "They have another one," Rin breathed, moving closer to examine the artifact. "The symbols are the same." "Not just another one," Thorne corrected, indicating a wall display showing a map of Aloria, with multiple locations marked. "They've been collecting them systematically from both Alliance and Throne territories." Rin studied the map recognition dawning. "These markers, they align with major battle sites from the past 3 years. Harris Neverdale, the Crimson Valley. Battles that seemed strategically questionable at the time," Thorne added grimly. "Now we know why they were fought." The realization sent a chill through Rin's body. "They've been using us soldiers on both sides to secure these artifacts. Thousands have died for this," a new voice completed her thought. They spun to find General Corvus standing in the doorway flanked by armed guards, whose weapons were trained on them with unwavering precision. Major Thorne, the general, continued, disappointment coloring his tone. I had hoped your exceptional service record reflected genuine loyalty, rather than misguided curiosity. Loyalty to what exactly? Thorne challenged, subtly shifting his position to place himself between the general and Rin, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by either of them. To the throne, or to your personal ambitions? Corvus smiled thinly. They are one and the same, Major. The bloodline transmission technology will secure the throne's dominance for generations to come. The war, costly as it has been, was a necessary price for such power. You orchestrated battles specifically to recover these artifacts. Rin accused, unable to contain her outrage. You sacrificed your own soldiers and ours for what? The ability to drain life from one person to enhance another. A crude simplification, Captain Kale, but essentially correct, Corvus replied, seemingly untroubled by her fury. Though I am curious how an Alliance captain came to be working alongside one of my best officers. And more importantly, how you bypassed our security to reach this level. Rin and Thorne exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. With their plan exposed, there remained only one path forward: the truth, or at least as much of it as might serve their purpose. We're bound by the blood oath, Thorne stated, rolling up his sleeve to reveal markings that had appeared on his arm, a mirror to those on Rin's, though neither had noticed their manifestation until now. Her sword invoked ancient magic when it drew my blood in battle. Corvus's expression shifted from mild amusement to intense interest. The blood oath, fascinating. The legends speak of such bonds, but to witness it in person. He stepped closer, examining the markings on both their arms, with the clinical detachment of a scientist studying laboratory specimens. And this bond allowed you to bypass our security systems, to move as one entity, rather than two separate individuals. Something like that, Rin confirmed cautiously. Remarkable, Corvus murmured. You've inadvertently demonstrated exactly what my research aims to achieve: the sharing of abilities across blood connections. He turned to his guards. Secure them and bring them to the main laboratory. Dr. Varen will want to study this phenomenon thoroughly. As the guards moved to comply, Rin felt Lumina pulse against her back, the sword's energy responding to her rising desperation. The blood oath markings burned fiercely, as if urging action. In that moment, something passed between her and Thorne, an understanding deeper than words, a shared resolve born of their unlikely alliance. Almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Rin's hand found Lumina's hilt, as Thorne tensed beside her, ready to move. The element of surprise was their only advantage against superior numbers and firepower. Now, Thorne shouted, lunging toward the nearest guard. Lumina cleared its hidden sheath with a sound like tearing silk, its crystalline edge glowing with inner light, as Rin brought it to bear against their attackers. The guards, momentarily startled by the sudden aggression, hesitated just long enough for the first attacks to land. Thorne disarmed one guard with brutal efficiency, using the man's own weapon to incapacitate a second. Rin moved like liquid lightning Lumina, slicing through gun barrels and armor straps with equal ease, disabling rather than killing whenever possible. General Corvus backed toward the exit, drawing his own sidearm, as the tide of the brief skirmish turned against his guards. Remarkable teamwork, he commented, sounding more like an impressed observer than a threatened participant. The blood oath creates synchronicity I hadn't anticipated. It's over, General Rin, declared Lumina's point directed at his chest. We know the truth about your research, about the battles you've engineered. The Celestial Council will hear of this. Corvus smiled, oddly unperturbed by his apparent defeat. You assume you'll leave this facility alive, Captain. A grave miscalculation. He pressed a button on a device at his wrist, and immediately the artifact at the center of the room pulsed with crimson energy. Unlike the uncontrolled explosion at Harris Fortress, this activation appeared directed, focused a beam of blood-red light that shot toward Thorn with unerring precision. "No!" Rin cried the blood oath, compelling her to action before her mind could process the threat. She threw herself into the path of the energy beam Lumina raised in desperate defense. The impact drove her to her knees as the sword absorbed the brunt of the attack, ancient runes blazing along its length. Pain seared through her arm as the blood oath markings flared in response, channeling the destructive energy through their mystical connection. Thorn was at her side in an instant, supporting her, as the backlash of power threatened to overwhelm them both. "Hold on," he urged, his voice strained, as he too felt the effects of the blood magic through their shared bond. "Fascinating," Corvus remarked, observing the phenomenon with scientific detachment. "The sword acts as a conduit between you, redirecting the energy that should have incapacitated the Major. Even more impressive than I anticipated." Rin struggled to maintain her grip on Lumina, as the sword continued to pulse with competing energies. The ancient magic of the Blood Oath and the stolen power of the Bloodline Transmission artifact. Through the haze of pain, a realization dawned. The technologies were connected to applications of the same fundamental principle. "The vial," she gasped to Thorn. "Elandra's potion." Understanding her intent, Thorn retrieved the small container of bloodroot extract from within his uniform. Without hesitation, he uncapped it and pressed it to her lips. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. As the luminescent liquid coursed through her system, the blood oath markings expanded across her entire body, mirrored on Thorn's skin in perfect symmetry. Lumina, transformed from sword to pure light, a conduit of energy between them that fed back into the artifact itself. Corvus's expression shifted from scientific curiosity to alarm as the system he had so carefully controlled began to destabilize. "Stop them," he ordered the remaining guards. The feedback loop could trigger a cascade failure. But it was too late. The connection between Rin Thorn and the artifact had become self-sustaining drawing power from the very technology designed to exploit blood bonds. The room filled with pulsating light as consoles sparked and died, the facility's power grid overloading under the strain. "We need to destroy it," Thorn shouted over the mounting chaos. "The artifact is the source." Rin nodded, though the effort of remaining conscious was becoming overwhelming. Together, they staggered toward the central platform Lumina held between them, its crystalline edge now a blade of pure energy. The guards opened fire, but their shots seemed to bend around the pair, deflected by the maelstrom of power that surrounded them. General Corvus backed toward the exit, his scientific detachment giving way to genuine fear as he witnessed the uncontrolled manifestation of the power he had sought to harness. With one final coordinated effort, Rin and Thorn brought Lumina down upon the artifact. The contact produced an explosion of light and sound that threw everyone in the chamber to the ground, a shockwave of released energy that rippled outward through the mountain fortress. As consciousness faded, Rin felt Thorn's hand grasp hers, their shared determination, the only anchor in a sea of chaotic power. The world went white, then black. Awareness returned to Rin, slowly, painfully. The first sensation was the cool touch of metal against her cheek, followed by the distant sound of alarms and the acrid smell of electrical fires. Her body felt impossibly heavy, drained of all strength, yet somehow she managed to open her eyes. The laboratory lay in ruins around them. The artifact that had stood on the central platform was now nothing more than scattered fragments, its power spent in the cataclysmic release of energy. Nearby, Thorn was beginning to stir his movement, triggering a response in the blood oath markings that still adorned her skin, fainter now, but still present. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thorn groaned, pushing himself into a sitting position with visible effort. "Define all right," he muttered, echoing his response from days earlier during the sandstorm. Despite everything, Rin found herself smiling at the callback. "We're alive," she pointed out. "That's a start." "The artifact." "Destroyed," Rin confirmed, glancing at the shattered remains. "Along with most of this level by the look of things." They surveyed the damage in silence, taking stock of their situation. The guards lay unconscious, or had fled, and General Corvus was nowhere to be seen. Most importantly, the data terminals around the room remained at least partially functional, and likely contained the evidence they needed. "We need to download whatever information we can," Thorne said, voicing Rin's thoughts. "Proof of what they've been doing, of the battles they've engineered to recover these artifacts." With effort, they helped each other to their feet and staggered to the nearest intact terminal. Thorne's security clearance, combined with the chaos of the emergency protocols, granted them access to files that would normally have been heavily restricted. Working quickly, they transferred research data, communication logs, and operation reports to a portable storage device. "This is everything the Celestial Council will need to verify our claims," Rin said as the download completed. "Evidence that high-ranking officials on both sides have been prolonging the war for their own purposes." "Now we just need to get it to them," Thorne replied, "and escape a heavily fortified military installation in the process. Simple." The dry humor in his tone brought another smile to Rin's face. Somehow, in the midst of their impossible situation, they had developed a rapport that transcended their opposing allegiances, a connection that might have been solely attributed to the blood oath, if not for the genuine respect that had grown between them. Lumina, which had returned to its physical form after the destruction of the artifact, lay on the floor nearby. As Rin retrieved it, she noticed a change in the ancient blade. The runes that had always adorned its surface were now dormant, their usual subtle glow extinguished. Whether this indicated a fundamental change in the sword's magic, or merely a temporary depletion of its power, remained to be seen. "The emergency protocols will have opened certain evacuation routes," Thorne explained, as they made their way out of the devastated laboratory. "If we can reach the eastern quadrant before they re-establish full security lockdown, there's a maintenance tunnel that leads to an external exit point. And if we encounter resistance," Rin asked, all too aware of their depleted state. Thorne indicated the security uniforms on the unconscious guards. "We borrow disguises and bluff our way through. Most personnel will be focused on containing the damage, rather than hunting infiltrators." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the best option available. After donning the appropriated uniforms, they navigated the chaotic hallways of Level 5, joining the stream of personnel evacuating from the lower levels. The destruction caused by the artifact's implosion had resulted in widespread system failures throughout the fortress, lending credibility to their disguises as they assisted with evacuation procedures. They were halfway to the eastern quadrant when a squad of elite guards rounded the corner ahead, led by none other than General Corvus himself. The general had survived the laboratory explosion, though not unscathed. His uniform was torn and singed, and a nasty gash across his forehead left half his face covered in blood. "Containment team with me," he ordered the squad. "The Alliance infiltrator and the traitor cannot be allowed to escape." His gaze swept the corridor, passing over Rin and Thorne without recognition, thanks to their disguises, then moved on. Once the squad had passed, Rin released the breath she'd been holding. "That was close." "Too close," Thorne agreed. "But it buys us time. They're searching in the wrong direction." They continued their journey through the fortress, adapting their route as necessary to avoid security checkpoints and search parties. The blood oath markings, though faded, seemed to pulse whenever danger approached, providing an almost supernatural early warning system that proved invaluable in their escape. When they finally reached the maintenance tunnel, Thorne had mentioned they discarded their borrowed uniforms and retrieved their own clothing from where they had concealed it within their packs. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, promising either freedom or a dead end. There was no way to be certain until they traversed its length. "Ready?" Thorne asked, offering Rin a small light source. She nodded, muscles tensed for whatever might await them. "Ready." The tunnel proved to be longer than anticipated, a winding passage through the mountain's natural cave system that had been adapted for emergency use. In places, they were forced to crawl through narrow apertures, in others, to wade through shallow underground streams that had breached the constructed pathways. After what felt like hours of exhausting progress, they detected a change in the air, a freshness that suggested they were nearing an exit. Following this subtle promise of freedom, they emerged into the fading light of dusk on a remote slope of the mountain, several kilometers from the fortress itself. "We made it," Rin breathed the relief in her voice, tempered by the knowledge that their mission was only half complete. "Now, we need to reach the Celestial Council. The nearest neutral territory is 3 days' journey on foot." Thorn calculated, studying the landscape. "Though we might find transportation in one of the border settlements if we're lucky." As they began their descent down the mountain slope, Rin became aware of a subtle change in the blood oath markings on her arm. The intricate patterns had begun to shift, rearranging themselves into new configurations that seemed to pulse with diminishing frequency. "Thorn," she said, extending her arm to show him the change. "Look." He examined his own arm, where the matching markings were undergoing the same transformation. "The oath is changing," he observed. "Weakening, perhaps. Or transforming," Rin suggested. "When we destroyed the artifact, we disrupted whatever power was amplifying the ancient magics. Maybe the oath is returning to its original form, whatever that might be." They continued their journey as night fell, fully navigating by starlight through terrain that gradually transitioned from volcanic rock to scrubland. Though both were exhausted to the point of collapse, they pressed on, knowing that pursuit would not be far behind once the charred throne realized the extent of their theft. Dawn found them sheltering in the hollow of a massive dead tree, taking turns to keep watch, while the other grabbed precious moments of rest. It was during one such exchange that Thorn voiced a concern that had clearly been weighing on his mind. "What happens after?" he asked, as Rin prepared to take over the watch. "If we succeed, if we reach the Celestial Council, and they act on the evidence we've provided, what then?" The question caught Rin off guard, not because she hadn't considered it, but because she had been deliberately avoiding doing so. "I suppose we return to our respective sides," she said finally. "The blood oath will be fulfilled once the truth is revealed. And we become enemies once more." There was something in Thorn's tone, a reluctance, a questioning that reflected her own conflicted feelings. "I don't know if I can see you as an enemy anymore." Rin admitted, the words difficult to voice after years of conditioned hatred. "Not after everything we've experienced together." Thorn studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light of their shelter. "Nor I you," he said finally, "which presents its own set of complications." Before Rin could respond, a sound outside their shelter froze them both, the unmistakable hum of a hover transport approaching. They extinguished their small light source and pressed against the interior of the hollow tree, weapons ready. The transport passed overhead, powerful searchlights sweeping the terrain below. It wasn't the random patrol of border security, but a focused search pattern. They were being hunted. "They must have realized what we took," Thorn whispered, once the transport had moved on. "Those files contained evidence that would incriminate high-ranking officials on both sides." "We need to move faster," Rin decided. "Alternate routes avoid open ground." "The desert crossing will be the most dangerous," Thorn warned. "No cover for at least 20 kilometers. "Then we wait for night and cross under darkness," Rin replied. "We've come too far to fail now." As they resumed their journey, taking a more circuitous route through areas of denser vegetation, Rin found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that fateful encounter at Harris Fortress. The blood oath had forced her into an alliance with her sworn enemy. Yet what had begun as a magical compulsion had evolved into something else entirely, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. The markings on her arm continued to evolve, the patterns shifting and fading with each passing hour. By the time they reached the edge of the desert expanse that separated them from neutral territory, the once vivid designs had faded to the point where they resembled old scars more than mystical bonds. They waited for nightfall before attempting the crossing, using the time to rest and prepare for the grueling journey ahead. Water supplies were running dangerously low, and neither had eaten more than minimal rations since escaping Dragonspine. We should reach the border settlement by tomorrow evening if we maintain a steady pace. Thorn calculated studying the stars that would guide their crossing. From there, it's another day to the Council's regional embassy. If we're not intercepted first, Rin added grimly, checking Lumina one last time before sheathing it. The sword had regained some of its subtle glow, though it remained notably diminished compared to its former brilliance. As full darkness descended, they set out across the desert, two figures moving like shadows across the endless expanse of sand. The night was mercifully clear stars, providing both light and navigational reference as they walked in companionable silence, conserving energy for the long hours ahead. They were halfway across when disaster struck. A distant hum became a roar as hover transports suddenly appeared on the horizon behind them, powerful searchlights cutting through the darkness. There was nowhere to hide on the open desert, no cover to conceal their presence. "Run!" Thorn urged, grabbing Rin's hand as they abandoned stealth for speed. They sprinted across the sand, desperate to reach the distant rocks that marked the beginning of the border territories. Behind them, the transports gained ground rapidly, their engines designed for swift pursuit across precisely this type of terrain. The first stun blasts struck the sand near their feet, kicking up plumes of dust that temporarily blinded them. These weren't lethal shots, they were meant to incapacitate to capture, rather than kill. In some ways, that was more frightening. It meant interrogation, imprisonment, perhaps execution, after extracting whatever information they possessed. "We're not going to make it," Rin shouted over the approaching roar of engines. Thorn pulled her behind a small dune, offering momentary concealment as the transports overshot their position. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "You have the data crystal. You can still complete the mission." Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. "No," Rin protested. "I'm not leaving you behind." "The oath is fading," Thorn pointed out, indicating the markings that had diminished to ghostly outlines on their skin. "Whatever compulsion bound us is weakening. You're free to make your own choice now." "And I choose to stay," Rin insisted. "We started this together, we'll finish it together." The determination in her voice left no room for argument, but Thorn's expression suggested he had already made his decision. "Sometimes the mission must come before the individual," he said softly. "You taught me that in a way, showed me that there are principles worth fighting for beyond blind loyalty to a flag or faction." Before Rin could respond, he removed something from his pocket, a small device she recognized as a locator beacon standard issue for high-ranking Charred Throne officers. "They're tracking this," he explained. "If we separate, they'll follow me, giving you a chance to reach the border." "Valak, no," Rin said, using his first name for the first time since they had met. "There has to be another way." For a moment, something shifted in his expression, surprise at the use of his name perhaps, or at the genuine concern behind it. Then determination returned, hardening his features into the mask of the soldier he had always been. "When blood is given freely in equal measure to that which was taken, the debt is balanced and the bond dissolved," he quoted, recalling Alandra's translation of the ancient text. "This is my choice, Rin. My blood freely given for a cause I deem worthy." The approaching transports circled back their searchlights, sweeping the dunes in expanding patterns. There was precious little time left for debate. "I'll create a diversion," Thorn continued, checking his weapon. "Head due east from here, there's a ravine that leads directly to the border station. Follow it, and you'll reach safety before dawn." "And you, what happens when they capture you?" Thorn's smile was grim, but resolute. "I'll tell them the truth, as much of it as necessary to keep them occupied while you deliver the evidence. After that," he shrugged. "One problem at a time." Rin knew he was right logically, at least. The mission had to come first, exposing the conspiracy that had prolonged the war and cost countless lives on both sides. Yet something within her rebelled at the thought of abandoning him, something that had nothing to do with the fading blood oath, and everything to do with the bond they had forged through shared hardship and purpose. "Promise me you'll survive," she demanded. "Promise me I'll see you again." "I promise to try," he replied honestly. "Now go. There's no more time." With aching reluctance, Rin nodded, accepting the necessity of their separation. In a gesture that surprised them both, she leaned forward and pressed her lips briefly to his, not a gesture of passion, but of connection, of acknowledgement, that whatever lay between them had transcended the boundaries of enemy and ally. "Until we meet again, Major," she whispered, then turned and vanished into the darkness, heading east toward the promised ravine. Behind her, she heard Thorn activate the locator beacon, its signal strong enough to draw immediate attention. Moments later, the sound of weapons fire echoed across the desert Thorn, creating his diversion, drawing the pursuit away from her escape route. Every instinct urged her to turn back to fight alongside him, but discipline prevailed. The data crystal weighed heavy in her pocket, a physical reminder of the responsibility she carried. Thousands of lives depended on her reaching the Celestial Council, with the evidence of betrayal at the highest levels. The ravine appeared ahead as promised, a dark gash in the desert floor that would conceal her from aerial pursuit. As she slipped into its protective shadows, the blood oath markings on her arm pulsed one final time. A farewell perhaps, or a promise kept, then faded completely, leaving unmarked skin where intricate patterns had once proclaimed her bond. The oath was fulfilled. Valak Thorn had given his blood, freely sacrificing himself for the greater good. Yet even as the magical compulsion dissolved, Rin found that the connection remained a bond, forged by choice, rather than ancient magic. With renewed determination, she pressed onward through the ravine, her path now illuminated, not by mystical runes, but by the first rays of dawn breaking over the eastern horizon. Whatever awaited at the journey's end, peace or further conflict, reunion or permanent separation, she would face it with the same courage that had guided her through the impossible days since Harris Fortress. The border station appeared as the sun climbed higher in the sky, a neutral outpost marked with the distinctive emblem of the Celestial Council, a star encircled by 3 crescents, symbolizing unity among the factions of Aloria. Armed guards of mixed allegiance patrolled its perimeter, their uniforms bearing neither Alliance blue nor Throne crimson, but the silver and white of Council authority. Rin approached openly, hands raised to show she carried no immediate threat. "Captain Rin Kale of the Light Alliance," she called out as the guards took notice of her. "I seek sanctuary and audience with the Council representative." The guards surrounded her with weapons, raised standard protocol for any military personnel entering neutral territory. "Your purpose, Captain?" the senior officer inquired, his accent suggesting origins in the Eastern Provinces territory that had remained determinedly unaligned throughout the conflict. "I carry evidence of high-level conspiracy within both the Alliance and the Charred Throne," Rin stated, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Information vital to ending the war." Skepticism was evident in the officer's expression, but Council protocol was clear regarding such claims. "You will surrender all weapons and submit to security screening," he informed her. "If your claims have merit, the representative will hear you." Rin relinquished Lumina with reluctance, the sword's diminished glow, seemingly reflecting her own drained state. As she was escorted into the station compound, she cast one final glance toward the western desert, where Thorn had made his stand. No pursuit was visible on the horizon. Whether that indicated success or failure on his part, she couldn't know. The interior of the border station revealed itself to be more than the simple outpost it appeared from outside. Beneath the modest surface structures lay a complex of chambers and offices, a microcosm of the Grand Council headquarters in the Central Territories. Here, representatives maintained the delicate balance of neutrality, mediating disputes, and monitoring for violations of the armistice agreements that governed border regions. After thorough security screening and verification of her identity, Rin was led to a chamber where a robed figure awaited Councillor Taven, one of the 12 individuals who comprised the ruling body of neutral Eloria. "Captain Kale," the counselor, greeted her, his age-lined face impassive. "I am told you bring evidence of most serious allegations." Rin produced the data crystal, placing it on the table between them. "This contains proof that elements within both the Alliance and Throne high commands have deliberately prolonged the war to recover ancient artifacts. Artifacts containing technology that could destabilize the entire continent if weaponized." Taven raised an eyebrow, the only indication that her statement had made an impact. "A significant claim, Captain. One that would require irrefutable evidence to pursue. The crystal contains research data from Dragonspine Fortress, the Throne's most secure facility, detailing experiments with something called bloodline transmission technology. It also includes communication logs between commanding officers of both factions, coordinating battle plans specifically to secure these artifacts, while maintaining the appearance of legitimate military objectives." The counselor's expression remained neutral as he studied her. "And how did you come to possess this information, Captain? As I understand it, you are a field officer, not intelligence." Rin hesitated, knowing that the full truth would be difficult to believe, yet unwilling to lie to the one person who might help end the conflict. "I was bound by ancient magic to a charred throne officer, Major Valak Thorn. Together, we discovered the conspiracy and infiltrated Dragonspine to gather evidence." To his credit, Taven did not immediately dismiss her account as fantasy. The history of Eloria was rich with instances of ancient magic, intersecting with modern conflict, and the Council's archives contained records of phenomena that defied conventional explanation. "This Major Thorn," he inquired, "where is he now?" The question sent a pang through Rin's heart. "He sacrificed himself to ensure I could reach you with the evidence. He's likely been captured or killed by Throne forces." Taven nodded slowly, evaluating both her words and the emotions behind them. "You've taken an extraordinary risk in bringing this to us, Captain Kale. Rest assured, the Council will examine your evidence thoroughly. If your claims prove valid, action will be swift and decisive." "How long?" Rin asked, the exhaustion of her journey finally catching up with her. "The analysis will take time, perhaps days. In the meantime, you will remain here under Council protection. Both the Alliance and the Throne will be informed of your presence as neutrality protocols require, but neither will be permitted to reclaim you until the investigation is complete." It wasn't the immediate action Rin had hoped for, but it was the best she could expect from an organization built on careful diplomacy and verification. With a weary nod, she accepted the counselor's terms. "There is one more thing," she said, as Taven prepared to leave. "Major Thorn risked everything to expose this conspiracy. If he still lives, he deserves the same protection I've been granted. If he can be located and extracted without violating sovereignty agreements, the Council will consider such action." Taven replied, his careful phrasing, neither a promise nor a refusal. "For now, Captain, I suggest you rest. Your part in this affair may be concluded, or it may be just beginning." The days that followed passed in a haze of debriefings, medical examinations, and restless waiting. Rin provided detailed accounts of everything that had transpired since Harris Fortress, from the invocation of the Blood Oath to the destruction of the artifact at Dragonspine. Council analysts pored over the data crystal's contents, verifying its authenticity and correlating its information with their own intelligence reports. On the fourth day, Counselor Taven summoned her to his office, his expression more animated than she had yet seen it. "Your evidence has been verified, Captain," he announced without preamble. "The Council has convened an emergency session to address these findings." Relief flooded through Rin, though it was tempered by concern for Thorn's fate. "And what of Major Thorn? Has there been any word?" "That is partly why I've called you here," Taven replied. "We've received communication from the Charred Throne regarding a prisoner exchange specifically requesting terms for Major Thorn's release in exchange for certain concessions." Hope surged within Rin's chest. "He's alive!" It would appear so, though his condition is not specified in the communication. What is significant, however, is the timing. This request arrived mere hours after we formally notified both factions of our investigation into the conspiracy you exposed. The implication was clear. Someone within the throne hierarchy wanted Thorne silenced before he could provide further evidence to the council. The exchange offer was likely a pretext to regain custody of a dangerous witness. "You can't agree to their terms," Rin stated firmly. "It would be a death sentence for him." "The council has no intention of facilitating such an outcome," Taven assured her. "However, the situation presents an opportunity. The emergency session will include representatives from both the Alliance and the Throne individuals, who, according to your evidence, may not be complicit in the conspiracy. Their presence creates diplomatic channels through which more direct action might be pursued." Rin understood the delicate dance of politics that Taven was describing. The Council could not directly intervene in Throne territory without risking open conflict, but they could apply pressure through legitimate diplomatic means, especially with the leverage provided by the damning evidence. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Your testimony before the full council and the faction representatives," Taven replied. "Your first-hand account combined with the technical data will be difficult to dismiss, particularly when delivered by an officer with your service record." The prospect of facing representatives from both factions of publicly accusing high-ranking officials of conspiracy and betrayal was daunting. Yet Rin knew it was necessary not just for Thorne's sake, but for all of Eloria. "I'll do it," she agreed. "When?" "Tomorrow. A transport will take us to the council headquarters at first light." As Taven had indicated, dawn brought the arrival of a sleek council transport, a vessel designed for speed, rather than combat, painted in the silver and white colors of neutrality. Rin boarded alongside the councillor and a small contingent of diplomatic staff, her mind focused on the task ahead. Lumina had been returned to her as a gesture of good faith, though the sword remained in its diminished state, the ancient runes dormant along its length. Rin found she missed the subtle hum of its energy, a presence that had been her constant companion throughout years of service. The journey to the council headquarters passed in contemplative silence. Located in the heart of Eloria's central territories, the celestial spire rose like a monument to neutrality, a towering structure of crystal and stone that predated the current conflict by centuries. Here, the 12 councillors governed the diminishing neutral lands and mediated disputes between the warring factions when diplomatic channels remained open. As the transport docked at one of the spire's many landing platforms, Rin was struck by the contrast between this place of ordered serenity and the chaos of the battlefield she had left behind. Guards in ceremonial silver armor escorted them into the spire's interior through corridors adorned with artifacts and artwork from all regions of Eloria, a deliberate representation of the cultural unity the council sought to preserve. The council chamber itself was a circular room dominated by a massive table of polished stone, around which 13 chairs were arranged, 12 for the councillors, and one, slightly more elevated, for the High Councillor, who led their deliberations. Representatives from the Alliance and the Throne occupied observer positions on opposite sides of the chamber, their delegations small, but comprised of high-ranking officials. Rin recognized General Merrick among the Alliance representatives, a hardline commander known for his aggressive tactics, but not, according to the evidence she had uncovered, directly implicated in the conspiracy. The Throne delegation was led by a woman Rin didn't immediately recognize, though her insignia identified her as a member of their diplomatic corps, rather than military command. As Rin took her place at the witness position, the chamber fell silent, all eyes turning to her, with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The High Councillor, a woman whose advanced age was belied by the sharpness of her gaze, addressed the assembly. "This emergency session has been convened to address evidence of most serious violations of the Keldar Accords." She began, her voice carrying effortlessly throughout the chamber. Captain Rin Kale of the Light Alliance has provided information suggesting that elements within both faction commands have deliberately prolonged the current conflict for purposes unrelated to stated military objectives. Captain Kale will present her testimony, after which the Council will hear responses from faction representatives. With that introduction, Rin was invited to speak. Drawing a deep breath, she recounted the events that had led her to this moment: the encounter at Harris Fortress, the invocation of the Blood Oath, the discovery of the conspiracy regarding bloodline transmission technology, and the infiltration of Dragonspine Fortress. She omitted certain personal details of her journey with Thorn, but emphasized the collaboration that had allowed them to uncover the truth. As she spoke, displays around the chamber showed selected data from the crystal. She had delivered research notes, communication logs, battle plans with annotations revealing their true purpose. The evidence was damning, leaving little room for denial or deflection. When she concluded her testimony, the chamber remained silent for several moments, the weight of her accusations settling over the assembly. Then, predictably, the recriminations began. "These allegations are preposterous," the throne representative declared, rising to her feet. "Clearly, the Alliance has fabricated this so-called evidence to undermine our position in the conflict." General Merrick of the Alliance responded with equal indignation. "If anyone has manipulated events, it is the throne. The technology described could only have been developed in your research facilities." The exchange deteriorated rapidly into mutual accusations, exactly the response the conspirators would have hoped for faction representatives so busy defending their respective sides that the core issue remained unaddressed. Rin watched with growing frustration as the opportunity for unified action slipped away amid political posturing. It was the High Counselor who finally cut through the noise, her voice sharp with authority. "Enough, this bickering serves only those who would see the conflict continue. Captain Kale has provided evidence implicating individuals within both factions, evidence that has been independently verified by Council analysts." She gestured to a console before her bringing up new displays around the chamber. "Moreover, our own intelligence networks have corroborated key elements of this testimony. The battle patterns describe the unusual resource allocations, the unexplained absences of certain commanders during critical operations, all align with Captain Kale's account." The chamber quieted as the representatives absorbed this additional validation. The High Counselor continued her tone, leaving no room for further debate. "The Council has already issued orders for the detention of specific individuals named in the evidence pending formal investigation. Cooperation from both factions is not requested. It is required under the terms of the Keldar Accords, which all present have sworn to uphold." It was a masterful assertion of the Council's authority, reminding the representatives that whatever their differences, both factions were bound by treaties that granted the Council jurisdiction in matters of this nature. The political maneuvering subsided, replaced by reluctant acknowledgement of the process that must now unfold. As the session progressed to discussions of next steps, Rin found herself watching the Alliance delegation closely. General Merrick's expression had shifted from defensive outrage to thoughtful consideration, a sign that perhaps at least some within the command structure might be willing to acknowledge the betrayal from within. The proceedings continued for hours, moving from presentation of evidence to debate over appropriate responses. Calls for immediate cessation of hostilities were met with practical concerns about verification and enforcement. Proposals for joint investigation teams faced resistance from those worried about sovereignty violations. Yet, beneath the diplomatic language and procedural objections, a sense of momentum was building, a recognition that the revelations could not simply be dismissed or buried. When the session finally adjourned, Councillor Taven approached Rin as she prepared to leave the chamber. "You've done well, Captain," he commended her. "The wheels are in motion now, however slowly they may turn." "And Major Thorn?" She asked the question that had dominated her thoughts throughout the proceedings. "The Council has formally requested his transfer to neutral custody as a key witness," Taven informed her. The throne delegation has agreed to relay the request, though I would caution against excessive optimism. Those who hold him have much to lose from his testimony. Rin nodded, understanding the diplomatic language for what it was, an acknowledgement that Thorne's situation remained precarious, despite the council's intervention. What happens now? Now we wait, Taven replied pragmatically. The evidence has been presented, the investigations have begun. The conspiracy cannot remain hidden any longer, which means its architects will be forced to either abandon their plans or take more desperate measures to preserve them. And I'm just supposed to stand by while others decide the outcome. The frustration in Rin's voice was evident, the soldier in her chafing at the constraints of diplomatic process. Taven studied her thoughtfully. Your official role in this matter may be concluded, Captain, but there are always other avenues through which one might contribute to justice. The Council's jurisdiction has limits, particularly regarding operations within sovereign territories. It took Rin a moment to recognize what the counselor was suggesting, not officially sanctioning further action on her part, but acknowledging that certain outcomes might be achieved through means the Council could not formally endorse. I understand, she said simply. I thought you might, Taven replied with the ghost of a smile. Now, if you'll excuse me, there are arrangements to be made regarding your accommodation while you remain under Council protection. As Taven departed, Rin found herself approached by an unexpected figure, General Merrick of the Alliance delegation. The grizzled commander had been a distant authority figure throughout her military career, known for his tactical brilliance, but rarely seen on the front lines where Rin had served. Captain Kale, he greeted her, his voice gruff but not unkind. A word, if I may. Wary but curious, Rin nodded her assent. Your testimony was illuminating. Merrick continued once they had moved to a more private corner of the chamber. Disturbing certainly, but not entirely surprising, to those who have observed patterns within our own command structure. You suspected something, Rin asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. Suspicion is different from evidence, the general replied. And questioning one's superiors without proof is a swift path to reassignment or worse. But yes, certain orders over the past year raise concerns, particularly the insistence on securing specific objectives with little strategic value. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. The Alliance High Command will be conducting its own internal investigation alongside the Council's efforts. Those responsible will be identified and removed from authority. With respect, sir, that may not be enough, Rin pointed out. Not while Major Thorne remains in throne custody, and not while the technology itself still exists. Marik's expression hardened slightly. Your concern for a throne officer is noteworthy, Captain, though perhaps understandable given the unusual circumstances of your alliance. However, extracting him from enemy territory is beyond our current capabilities without risking full-scale escalation of the conflict. I'm not asking for military intervention, sir. No, then what exactly are you asking for, Captain Kale? Rin met his gaze directly. Information, specifically regarding the Dragonspine detention protocols, and any intelligence on where a high-value prisoner might be held within the facility. Understanding dawned in the general's eyes. You're proposing to extract him yourself. A suicide mission by any reasonable assessment. Perhaps, Rin acknowledged, but also the best chance of securing a witness who can corroborate the evidence I've presented, a witness from within the throne's own command structure. Marik studied her for a long moment, weighing military pragmatism against protocol. The Alliance cannot officially sanction or support such an operation, he said finally. To do so would violate the very accords we're accusing the throne of breaching. I understand, sir. However, he continued, lowering his voice further, as a matter of historical record, certain intelligence files regarding charred throne installations are maintained in the Spire's military archives. Access to these archives is granted to all Alliance personnel of captain rank or higher during their stay at Council headquarters. For research purposes, naturally. It was as close to tacit approval as Rin could hope for, not direct assistance, but removal of at least one obstacle in her path. Thank you, sir. I'll be sure to further my education on the subject. Marek nodded, once then, turned to rejoin his delegation, leaving Rin with the first glimmer of a plan forming in her mind. If she could access detailed information on Dragonspine's layout and security protocols, she might be able to formulate an approach that stood at least some chance of success. The following days were spent in intensive preparation. True to General Marek's word, Rin was granted access to the military archives, where she pored over intelligence reports, structural analyses, and surveillance data regarding Dragonspine Fortress. The information was dated most had been collected before the current phase of the war, but it provided a foundation upon which to build. More recent intelligence came from an unexpected source. On the third day of her research, Rin was approached by a member of the Throne diplomatic delegation, a junior attaché, who requested a private meeting away from the watchful eyes of her superiors. Not everyone within the Throne supports what has happened, the young woman explained, once they were alone. There are those of us who believe in honorable conflict, not manipulation and sacrifice of our own people for technological advantage. She provided Rin with a data chip containing security protocols that had been updated since the archived information was collected, along with the location where Thorn was being held a high-security detention block on level 3 of the fortress, separate from the standard military prison. He's scheduled for transfer to a more secure facility tomorrow, the attaché warned. Once that happens, extraction becomes virtually impossible. Armed with this critical information, Rin finalized her plan. It would be a solo infiltration, any larger force would trigger alarms immediately, and she couldn't risk involving others in what was essentially an unsanctioned mission. The approach would be from the north face of the mountain, using a maintenance shaft that, according to the updated schematics, remained relatively unguarded due to its treacherous location. The most difficult part would be securing transportation. Without official sanction, she couldn't requisition a council vessel, and civilian transport would be too slow and conspicuous. This problem was solved by Councillor Taven, who arranged for Rin to escort a diplomatic courier to a border outpost, a mission that would provide her with a small but swift transport and legitimate reason to leave council headquarters. The council cannot acknowledge any action you might take beyond delivering the courier, Taven reminded her, as he provided the mission details. If captured, you will be disavowed by all parties. I understand the risks, Rin assured him, and I accept them. The journey to the border outpost passed without incident, the diplomatic courier unaware of Rin's true intentions. Upon delivering her charge safely, Rin commandeered the transport technically theft, but one she hoped would be forgiven if her mission succeeded. The flight to Dragonspine's vicinity was conducted with all identifying transponders, disabled the vessel, hugging the contours of the landscape to avoid detection by Throne surveillance systems. She landed several kilometers from the fortress in a ravine deep enough to conceal the transport from aerial patrols. The approach on foot was arduous, the northern face of the mountain living up to its reputation for treacherous terrain. Loose rock gave way beneath her boots, sending minor avalanches of stone cascading down the slope. More than once, Rin was forced to use Lumina to anchor herself to the mountainside, driving the blade into solid rock when no other handhold presented itself. Despite its diminished state, the sword performed its function admirably, its edge still sharp enough to penetrate stone when required. Rin found herself wondering if the blood oath, though no longer visible on her skin, had left some permanent connection between her and the ancient weapon, a bond that transcended the physical markings. The maintenance shaft entrance was exactly where the schematics had indicated, a narrow aperture set into the rock face, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. It had been designed for emergency venting of the fortress's power systems, rather than human access, but it offered a direct route to the interior that bypassed standard security checkpoints. The passage through the shaft was claustrophobic and disorienting, a journey through near-total darkness, guided only by the dim glow of emergency lighting spaced at irregular intervals. Several times, Rin was forced to remove equipment to navigate particularly narrow sections, retrieving it afterward by rope, in a painstaking process that consumed precious time. When she finally emerged into a maintenance tunnel within the fortress proper, her chrono indicated that nearly 3 hours had passed since she began her approach, leaving less than 5 before Thorn's scheduled transfer. Moving swiftly, but cautiously, she navigated through service corridors and ventilation ducts, avoiding the main passageways where patrols would be concentrated. Level 3 security, according to the intelligence she had received, was primarily automated sensor grids, identity scanners, and automated defense systems, rather than human guards. This presented both challenge and opportunity. Machines were more predictable than people, but left less room for improvisation or negotiation. The detention block housing Thorn was isolated from other sections of the level, accessible only through a heavily monitored security checkpoint. Direct approach was impossible without triggering multiple alarms, but the updated schematics had revealed an alternative: a maintenance access panel in the ceiling of the corridor, adjacent to the detention area, connected to the environmental control system that served the entire level. Rin located the access point and climbed into the narrow space above, crawling through ductwork barely large enough to accommodate her. The journey was slow and uncomfortable, each movement carefully controlled to minimize noise that might alert sensors or personnel below. When she reached the section directly above the detention block, she paused to assess the situation through a ventilation grill. The area below was divided into several individual cells, each secured by energy fields, rather than physical barriers. Guards were present but minimal, 2 stationed at the entrance checkpoint, with automated security handling monitoring of the prisoners. Locating Thorn's cell took several minutes of careful observation through different grills, but eventually she spotted him seated on a simple platform that served as both bed and chair, his posture straight. Despite the visible signs of interrogation he had endured, bruises marred his face, and his left arm was held at an angle that suggested injury, but his expression remained defiant. The sight of him alive, unbroken, despite his captivity, sent a wave of relief through Rin, so intense it momentarily disrupted her focus on the mission. She allowed herself a few seconds to acknowledge the emotion, then set it aside, concentrating on the task at hand. The extraction plan relied on precision timing and the predictable patterns of automated systems. Every 15 minutes, the environmental controls ran a diagnostic cycle, during which the sensors briefly deactivated to prevent false readings. This 3-second window would be her only opportunity to drop into the corridor without triggering immediate alarms. Checking the chronometer on her wrist, Rin positioned herself above the section of ductwork directly adjacent to Thorn's cell. As the countdown to the diagnostic cycle reached 0, she removed the grill and dropped silently to the floor below, immediately pressing herself against the wall to avoid motion sensors that would reactivate moments later. The cell's energy field was keyed to specific genetic signatures, allowing guards to pass through while containing prisoners. Bypassing such security would normally require specialized equipment or insider access codes, neither of which Rin possessed. But she had something potentially more valuable: Lumina, and whatever remnant of the blood oath might still reside within it. Drawing the sword, she approached the energy field cautiously. Though the visible markings of the oath had faded from her skin, she could still feel a subtle connection to Thorn, a resonance that had persisted beyond the magical compulsion that initially bound them. If that connection extended to Lumina as well, she pressed the sword's edge against the energy field, focusing on that lingering sense of connection. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the field began to ripple around the point of contact, creating a disturbance that spread outward, like waves across water. Thorn noticed the phenomenon immediately, his eyes widening in recognition as he caught sight of Rin behind the destabilizing barrier. Without hesitation, he rose and moved toward the disruption, one hand extended toward the weakening section of the field. As their fingers met through the fluctuating energy, something extraordinary happened. The blood oath markings reappeared briefly, on both their arms, glowing with renewed intensity, for just an instant before fading once more. In that moment, the field between them collapsed completely, creating an opening just large enough for Thorn to step through. "I knew you'd come," he said simply, his voice rough from disuse or interrogation. "I made a promise," Rin replied, already turning her attention to their escape route. "Can you climb?" Thorn tested his injured arm, wincing, but nodding affirmatively. "Lead the way." They had just reached the access point in the ceiling when alarms began to sound throughout the detention block. Whether triggered by the cell breach or some other security measure, there was no way to know. What mattered was that their window for escape had just narrowed dramatically. "Up quickly," Rin urged, helping Thorn navigate the awkward climb with his injured arm. They had barely replaced the grill behind them when guards burst into the corridor below, their shouts of alarm clearly audible through the thin barrier of the ductwork. The return journey through the environmental system was more challenging with two people, particularly given Thorn's injuries. Several times they were forced to backtrack when passages proved too narrow for him to navigate, consuming precious minutes as the fortress mobilized around them. "There's a secondary exit on the eastern face," Thorn whispered, as they paused at a junction to consult Rin's mental map of the facility. "Maintenance crews use it for external repairs less heavily guarded than the main access points." "Can you find it?" Rin asked, recognizing that his first-hand knowledge of the fortress might prove more valuable than the schematics she had studied. Thorn nodded, taking the lead as they continued through the labyrinthine network of service tunnels and access shafts. The sound of pursuit grew more distant as they moved away from the detention area, but the fortress-wide alert meant that all exit points would soon be secured. When they finally reached the maintenance exit, Thorn had mentioned they found it guarded by a single sentry, likely a minimal precaution established when the alert first sounded, before additional forces could be deployed. Taking advantage of their numerical advantage, they subdued the guard quickly and non-lethally, securing his unconscious form in a storage closet nearby. The exit led to a narrow ledge on the eastern face of the mountain, a dizzying drop visible beyond the simple safety railing that marked its edge. Unlike the treacherous northern approach, this side of the mountain featured a service path that zigzagged down to a small equipment depot at its base. "That depot will have transport vehicles," Thorn noted as they began their descent. "Maintenance crews use them to reach the fortress from the nearest outpost. If we can secure one before reinforcements arrive, we might actually make it out of here," Rin replied, allowing herself a moment of cautious optimism. Their progress down the service path was slower than ideal, hampered by Thorn's injuries and the need to move carefully on the exposed mountainside. Behind them, alarms continued to sound from within the fortress, and the distant whine of hover engines suggested aerial search parties were being deployed. They had nearly reached the equipment depot when the first search vehicle appeared above them, a light patrol craft equipped with spotlights and undoubtedly weapon systems. Pressing themselves against the mountain face, they froze as the craft's searchlight swept along the path below. For a tense moment, it seemed they had avoided detection. Then the light snapped back to their position, pinning them in its harsh glare. The patrol craft's weapon systems hummed to life, targeting arrays locking onto their location. "Jump!" Thorn shouted, grabbing Rin's arm and pulling her toward the edge of the path. The decision was made in an instant: certain capture, if they remained; possible survival, if they risked the drop to the slope below. Together, they leapt from the service path, just as weapons fire scorched the spot where they had stood moments before. The slope was steep, but not vertical, allowing them to slide rather than fall freely. Loose rock and scree accelerated their descent, carrying them downward in a controlled avalanche that abraded skin and tore clothing, but kept them from the fatal impact of a direct fall. They came to rest at the base of the slope, battered and bruised, but remarkably intact. The patrol craft, unable to maintain visual contact through the dust cloud their descent had created, circled overhead its searchlight, sweeping in expanding patterns as it sought to reacquire its targets. The depot. Thorne gasped, pointing to a small cluster of buildings, barely visible through the settling dust. Quickly, before they re-established visual contact. Half running, half staggering, they covered the short distance to the maintenance depot. The facility was deserted standard protocol during a security alert, with all personnel recalled to defensive positions at the fortress itself. Inside the main building, they found what they had hoped for: several small transport vehicles used for ferrying equipment and personnel between the fortress and more distant outposts. Rin selected the one closest to the exit, its design suggesting speed rather than carrying capacity. "Can you drive?" she asked, glancing at Thorne's injured arm. "Better than I can shoot in this condition," he confirmed, sliding into the driver's position. As Thorne activated the vehicle's systems, Rin secured the depot's doors behind them, not enough to stop pursuers for long, but perhaps sufficient to buy crucial seconds during their escape. By the time she joined Thorne in the transport, he had already plotted a course on its navigation system. "This route will take us through the outer perimeter's blind spot," he explained, as they accelerated out of the depot. "It's a gap in the sensor coverage small, but if we time it right, we might slip through before they can adjust the grid to compensate." The journey across the rugged terrain surrounding Dragonspine was a harrowing exercise in evasion. Patrol craft continued to sweep the area, their searchlights cutting through the gathering dusk, while ground vehicles deployed from the fortress formed an expanding perimeter of pursuit. Thorne's knowledge of the security systems proved invaluable, allowing them to anticipate patrol patterns and adjust their route accordingly. They abandoned the maintenance transport after several kilometers, continuing on foot through a narrow canyon that provided both cover from aerial observation and a path toward the ravine where Rin had concealed her commandeered vessel. "We're being herded," Thorne noted, as they paused to catch their breath behind a rock formation. "The patrol patterns aren't random. They're designed to channel escaping prisoners toward containment zones to the south." "Then we go east," Rin decided. "It's a longer route to the transport, but if they're expecting us to head south..." "It's our best option," Thorne agreed, "though the terrain is more exposed." They adjusted their course accordingly, using the deepening shadows of twilight to mask their movement across sections of open ground. Progress was painfully slow, each advance carefully timed between patrol sweeps, each path selected to maximize available cover. The ravine where Rin had hidden her transport was tantalizingly close when disaster struck. A patrol craft executing a search pattern at a lower altitude than its counterparts spotted their movement across an exposed stretch of terrain. Immediately, alarms sounded as the craft descended weapon systems, engaging with deadly precision. "Run!" Rin shouted, pushing Thorne toward the relative safety of a nearby outcropping. "Don't stop! Don't look back!" As he stumbled forward, she turned to face the approaching craft, Lumina drawn and held before her like a beacon. The sword, dormant for so long, suddenly blazed to life in her hands, ancient runes igniting along its length, with a brilliance that momentarily blinded the patrol craft's sensors. Using the distraction, Rin sprinted after Thorne, the renewed energy of Lumina seeming to flow into her limbs, lending her speed and strength beyond normal capability. They reached the outcropping seconds before weapons fire obliterated the ground where they had stood, rock fragments raining down around them as they pressed onward toward the ravine. More patrol craft converged on their position, drawn by the first craft's alert. The sky above, filled with searchlights and weapons platforms, a net of technology closing around two fugitives, armed with nothing but a sword and desperate determination. "We're not going to make it," Thorne gasped, as they finally reached the edge of the ravine, the transport visible below, but still several hundred meters away across exposed terrain. "They'll cut us down before we're halfway there." Rin assessed their situation with military precision. He was right. The odds of reaching the transport without being captured or killed were virtually non-existent. Yet surrender meant execution for Thorne, and imprisonment at best for herself, with the evidence they had fought so hard to expose potentially buried once more. "There's one thing we haven't tried," she said, her gaze falling to Lumina, still glowing with renewed energy in her hand. The blood oath, it connected us once, allowed us to share abilities. If there's any trace of that magic still within us. Understanding dawned in Thorn's eyes. Elandra's potion, you still have it? Rin nodded, retrieving the second vial of bloodroot extract that the healer had provided. They had used one during the confrontation at Dragonspine, but the second had remained untouched, carried as a last resort. It's a gamble, she acknowledged. We don't know if it will work without the full oath in effect. At this point, Thorn replied with grim humor, I'd say our alternatives are limited. Without further debate, they shared the luminescent liquid, each consuming half of the vial's contents. The effect was less dramatic than their previous experience, but no less profound. A warmth that spread through their bodies, followed by the reappearance of the blood oath markings, fainter than before, but clearly visible against their skin. I can feel it, Thorn murmured, flexing his previously injured arm with newfound ease. Like at Dragonspine, but more controlled, more focused. Rin nodded, experiencing the same sensation strength, flowing between them, abilities shared across the mystical connection. Together then, she said, extending her hand to him. All or nothing. Their fingers intertwined the markings on their arms, pulsing in perfect synchronization. With a deep breath, they stepped out from the cover of the outcropping and ran not toward the ravine, as their pursuers might expect, but along its edge, toward a point where the gap narrowed significantly. Patrol craft adjusted course immediately, weapons fire strafing the ground at their heels as they sprinted with supernatural speed, the shared power of the blood oath enhancing their physical capabilities beyond normal human limits. They reached the narrowest point of the ravine, just as the first craft moved into position for a clear shot. Now! Rin shouted, squeezing Thorn's hand as they leapt together across the gap. Time seemed to slow as they soared through the air, the ravine yawning beneath them, weapons fire slicing through the space they had occupied moments before. They landed on the opposite edge with impossible grace, the shared magic absorbing the impact that would have shattered ordinary bones. Without pausing to celebrate their success, they continued their sprint toward the transport, using the confusion caused by their unexpected trajectory to gain precious seconds. The patrol craft, temporarily disoriented by targets that had literally jumped beyond their predicted path, took crucial moments to reorient and pursue. Those moments were enough. They reached the transport as the first craft crested the ravine edge, its weapon systems engaging, just as Rin sealed the entry hatch behind them. Thorn was already at the control systems, powering up with practiced efficiency. Hold on, he warned, as the craft lifted off, accelerating hard to escape the weapons lock of their pursuers. What followed was a masterclass in evasive piloting, with Thorn pushing the small vessel beyond its design parameters, using terrain features and the lingering enhancement of the blood oath to execute maneuvers that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. Pursuit craft fell behind one by one, unable to match the combination of piloting skill and mystical enhancement that guided their quarry. When they finally broke atmosphere, leaving charred throne territory behind, both Rin and Thorn were physically exhausted but triumphant. The blood oath markings were fading once more, the effect of the bloodroot extract diminishing as they left immediate danger behind. Course set for Council headquarters. Thorn confirmed, engaging the autopilot, now that immediate evasion was no longer necessary. Estimated arrival in 4 hours. Rin nodded finally, allowing herself to relax slightly. They'll be looking for us the entire way. Let them look, Thorn replied with a tired smile. We've evaded worse. As the adrenaline of escape began to subside, Rin took the opportunity to examine Thorn more closely, assessing the injuries he had sustained during captivity. Though the blood oath's temporary enhancement had allowed him to function through their escape, the underlying damage remained. Bruised ribs, lacerations, evidence of systematic interrogation. They wanted to know how much I'd told the Council, he explained, as she tended to the worst of his wounds with the transport's basic medical supplies. And whether there were others within the throne who shared my treasonous perspective. Were there? Rin asked, recalling the young attaché who had provided crucial intelligence. More than they realize, Thorn confirmed. Not everyone in the throne hierarchy approved of sacrificing our own soldiers for technological advantage. The war may have divided Eloria, but principles of honor transcend factional boundaries. The observation resonated deeply with Rin, reflecting her own evolution over the course of their shared journey. What had begun as a magical compulsion, protecting an enemy against her will, had transformed into something far more profound: recognition that the divisions between Alliance and Throne were largely artificial, sustained by those who profited from conflict, rather than reflecting any fundamental incompatibility of values. "What happens after?" she asked, echoing the question Thorn had posed days earlier. "If the Council's investigation succeeds, if the conspirators are removed from power, and the technology secured." "Peace negotiations, I imagine," Thorn replied. "Genuine ones this time, without sabotage from within." "And us, do we return to opposing sides?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had fully articulated. Thorn reached out his fingers lightly, tracing the faded outline of the blood oath markings on Rin's arm. "I don't think we can," he said finally. "Not after everything we've experienced together. The oath may have brought us together by compulsion, but what remains now is choice. My choice, and yours." Rin covered his hand with her own, feeling the rightness of the connection between them, a bond forged through shared hardship, mutual respect, and ultimately shared purpose. "Then we find a new path," she suggested. "Neither Alliance nor Throne, but something different. Something better." As their vessel continued its journey toward Council headquarters, the sun rose on the horizon, casting golden light across the landscape below. Eloria stretched out beneath them, its territories divided by artificial boundaries, but united by the people who called it home, people who, like Rin and Thorn themselves, might discover that what united them was far stronger than what divided them, if only given the chance. The blood oath that had once seemed a curse had become something else entirely, the catalyst for a transformation that extended far beyond two individuals. In slashing Thorn's face in battle, Rin had unwittingly set in motion events that would reshape the future of their world. And as Lumina rested in its sheath beside her, its ancient runes now dormant, but not extinguished, Rin understood that some bonds transcended the magic that created them, persisting through choice rather than compulsion, through love rather than obligation. The debt had been paid, the oath fulfilled. What remained was the future they would build together in a world where enemies could become allies, and eventually something more. She slashed his face in battle, and his blood touched her blade, binding them together through ancient magic. But it was their shared journey, their mutual sacrifice, and ultimately their choice that transformed that binding from servitude to partnership, from obligation to love. As the transport continued its journey toward Council headquarters, Rin and Thorn watched the sun rise together, their hands intertwined no longer, enemies forced into alliance, but partners who had chosen their shared path forward. The world below would soon change old conflicts, giving way to new possibilities, and they would face whatever came next, as they had faced everything since that fateful day at Harris Fortress together.